It's always, I'm not enough. I'm not clever enough, attractive enough, smart enough, successful enough. And people think depression is because of a chemical imbalance in your brain. It really isn't. The number one thing that causes depression. You can do both. You can sell fashion and enoughness, and it changes everything, because we all know that anorexia and bulimia practically didn't exist until the media came in. In fact, there are studies in both Turkey and Fiji that prove that there was very minimal anorexia, bulimia, and eating disorders until cable television came in. And within 3 years, both those countries had an epidemic of eating disorders, because girls start to look at friends and go, oh, I should look like that. Yeah. I should be really thin with big hair. I should have thin thighs and big hair, but I got big thighs and thin hair, so I'm not enough. And the media has done a huge amount to damage our next generation, because it's what I call overexposure to fake perfection. Everyone on Instagram is perfect. Everyone on Facebook picks their perfect pictures, and young kids coming up think, I should look like that. I don't look like that. I'm not enough. And then they have all these role models like Kim Kardashian, and they don't understand that's not real. No one leaves their house looking shiny and glossy unless they've got a team of staff behind them. And I see that with young mothers too. They have a baby, and of course they're tired and stressed, but they look at all these women just had a baby, skinny, shiny hair, perfect baby, and think, oh, I'm not enough. And the media has really damaged people. And not just women, guys too. I work with so many depressed teenage boys, so many suicidal kids. And when you peel away the layers of what this is all about, it's always, I'm not enough. I'm not clever enough, attractive enough, smart enough, successful enough. And it's behind every addiction too. I've worked with thousands of addicts. I've never met one in my entire life who said, I'm enough. And when you don't feel enough, guess what you need? More. Yeah. I need more drugs, more meds, more praise, more stuff, because I don't feel enough. And what conventional medicine is doing is try to treat the symptom instead of treating the root of this not enoughness.
You know, I'm aware that a lot of psychiatrists, psychologists, they realize and are taught some of these kind of core gaps in our personality and the way that we think, but they're not exactly, and you know, the field isn't that successful with actually treating it, especially treating it in the short amount of time that you're able to do it. So what's different about your approach, and why are you so successful? So many people that I know love you so much. You've had such a huge impact on their life, and like talking to you in one conversation.
Well, my passion was, why don't I simplify therapy? I mean, there's no other thing where you go, hey, I got a headache. Shall I go and talk about it for a year? I got a pain in my tooth. Shall I ring up my dentist and go, hey, can I come in and discuss this? I go, no, you got an infection in there. I got to get the infection out. And therapy is a very strange model. It invites you to turn up and discuss your pain for a long time without any guarantee that you'll get better. No other doctor would go, hey, here's the model. Come and talk about your pain. You might not get better. You might. Who knows? I'm going to ask you every week, how do you feel? Well, I feel I'm in pain. When are you going to take the pain away? And so I found that model frustrating. All therapists have a good heart and want to help, but it's a broken model. Where else would you go? I invite you to bring your pain to me, pay me every week to talk about it. I might not even be able to help you. And with my clients, people in pain want to get better, whether that's physical pain, I've got headaches or eczema, or emotional pain, I feel inadequate, I lack self-esteem, I'm self-destructive, I sabotage myself. They all want to get better fast. So I created my own therapy called RTT. And the whole point was, let's treat the root, not the symptom. All my graduates are taught to look for what lies beneath. So when people come in and go, you know, I'm a compulsive shopper, compulsive shoplifter, I've got this compulsive scratching or itching, or I've got terrible headaches, or I've got irritable bowel, or I'm addicted to sugar. we don't treat that. We treat what lies beneath. And in RTT, it's what I call the 5 eyes. First of all, you become like a detective. You investigate, where did this begin? People go, oh, I've never been able to I'm not good with confrontation. I don't like being the center of attention. When no baby is born going, hey, don't look at me. I haven't got any hair. I haven't got any teeth. I've got these really fat legs. You know, having children, they love attention.
Yeah.
The first thing you're born with is attention. No baby says, I can't leave food. When they've had enough, they just stop. So I understood that all of our issues are acquired. And that's actually great news, because if you acquire an issue, you can become free of it. So we investigate, where did this come from? And then we find the imprint that has caused the behavior. And then we interpret it, interrupt it, get rid of it. Give you a great example. I work with a lot of anorexics and bulimics because conventional medicine cannot help those poor kids. It weighs them and tries to get them to... It was a mental illness. And I worked with someone who said, so we went back, when did this begin? And this girl remembered being in the car with her dad, who'd look at women and go, look at her dressed like that in those tight clothes. She's just a tramp. And she began to think, I never want anyone to say that about me. And her dad would say about her mum, your mum is a slut. She wears all these tight clothes. And she formed a thought, which is an imprint. I couldn't bear it if my husband spoke about me like that. Now, when you say something to the mind, it's an absolute command. Do anything and everything to make sure that doesn't happen. And then I worked with an anorexic who said almost the same thing. My dad used to look at porn. And I found him one day by mistake looking at porn, and I was this princess, and I thought a thought. I never want anyone to look at me like that. And now the mind's like, okay, my job is to make sure no one ever looks at you like that. So the anorexic didn't develop. The bulimic got very heavy. They both had the same thought. I don't want to be looked at like that. And they both changed their shape. And I work with many obese women and men, and they almost always go back to being abused. I don't want my mum's husband to look at me like that. I don't want my granddad to look at me in that weird way. I can't handle it. And the mind goes, you leave that with me. I can find a way of making sure no one looks at you with that lusty look. And that's what happens. The mind acts on our thoughts. Every thought you think and every word you say is a blueprint that your mind must work towards. The most common example is someone who says, I was in a relationship and that person broke my heart. They ripped it out and stabbed it. I could never go through that pain again. It would kill me to be rejected like that again. If I met another woman that took all my money, another guy that cheated on me, I would die. And your mind goes, you would die? You can't die. My job is to keep you alive. And if a relationship will make you die, leave that with me. I'll make sure you never have one again. I can give you gas. I can give you compulsive. I can make you a complete bitch. I can do anything. I can make you have become a recluse. But I can make sure that doesn't happen. And you see, we say these crazy things. My job is killing me. This commute makes me want to die. If I have one more customer like that, I'm going to jump under a train. And the mind goes, this place called work is killing you? Oh, no. My job is to keep you alive. So why don't I give you a lovely ulcer so you can't go to this place called work, and then it can't kill you?
So this is leading me to an important question I want to talk to you about, which is, I heard you say something along the lines of our thoughts create our reality, right? And so when I hear statements, even today, this is before, us meeting each other, but when I would hear somebody say, I'm starving, it would literally pop up in my mind like, you're not really starving.
You're not.
But these words that we use really do create our existence.
Yeah. Do you know that's so true? Because the strongest force in every human being in the world is that you must act in a way that is utterly consistent with how you define yourself. The words you speak, the thoughts you think, your mind has no choice but to make that real. Some people say, I'm starving, I'm dying of hunger, I could eat a horse. Your mind really believes that's true. Yeah. When you say, this is killing me, this is driving me insane. This kid is making me want to die. And mine goes, you're now having another one. If one makes you want to die, why don't I just give you unexplained infertility, secondary infertility? Because we think our mind's job is to make us happy. It really isn't. It's just to keep you alive on a planet when not long ago the odds weren't that great. So everything we do is to keep us alive. You know, one of the reasons we can't bear to be hungry is that is the number one thing that killed us 500 years ago, not disease, hunger. And our mind to this day is scared of hunger. And our logical mind goes, you know, I've got fish and chicken in the fridge at home and salad. But the illogical mind goes, I'm going to die of hunger. I'm just going to eat all these jelly beans now and taco chips. And if you only knew that you could dialogue back with your mind, you could have everything you want in the world, because people know, oh, I just heard Barack Obama say mindset. You need mindset. 80% of success is mindset. They don't even know what mindset is.
Right.
I said, what's mindset? They go, I don't know. It's something. Yeah. Is it focus? No. It's how you dialogue with you. Yeah. And since your mind believes everything you tell it, you might as well tell it amazing stuff.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. That's so true. That's the other part I want to get to is programming more empowering things.
Sure.
But for me, it's just like just going back on the statement of I'm starving. We're going to naturally have a tendency towards overeating.
Of course.
Most likely, you know.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think awareness is important, obviously, being aware of the language that we're using with ourselves. But I got to ask you this, and maybe this is a really big question, but how is it that some of us can become aware of our deficiencies? We can become aware of our stories, the roots, but yet we're not able to change it.
I guess because no one teaches this stuff. No one teaches you, you know, that you have a choice. You see, here's one of the rules of the mind. I have like 23 rules of the mind, but here's the best one. Your mind does not care if what you tell it is right or wrong, true or false, useful or useless, helpful or not helpful, beneficial or not beneficial. It doesn't care. It lets it in. You make your beliefs, but then your beliefs make you. And then even more oddly, the world starts to actually match what you believe. If you believe everyone's out to get you, and dogs are vicious creatures that attack you, you can make that belief real. And if you believe people are actually honestly really very nice and kind, and dogs are lovely creatures, they're man's best friend, that too will become real. So a lot of people know this stuff, but they actually don't know how to change it. So I had an American PA for one. I loved her, and she used this expression all the time. When I got the job with you, I wanted to die. When I knew I was coming to London, I wanted to die. And this cute English guy asked me out, I wanted to die. I'm like, darling, you don't want to die. You want to live. Stop saying, I want to die. Because some people, you know, nobody teaches us this stuff. If you go, oh my God, I've got a memory like a sieve, I forget everything, you make that real. And it's very important when working with children to really be aware of not saying, so, you know, I see many people with wealth blocks. They come in and go, I can't make money, I can't keep money, I can't attract money. And your relationship with money is actually fixed almost before you are 5 years old. And if you see your father going, this job is killing me, this is the price you pay for working for yourself. So one of my clients said, my dad used to lie on the sofa every Sunday with a headache and go, that's what happens when you have your own business. It kills you. Or another one said, my dad took antacids every morning and said, I've got an ulcer because this job is killing me. And a small child thinks, I don't want that job that's killing me. I'd rather not have a job. And then they've got this wiring, this coding that now says a job will kill you. And even though they want a job, they don't understand this old wiring. So it's very much the same thing when you have a parent that says, you know, if you're a good kid, you'll eat everything on your plate. You know how much money I spent on that? Think of those starving children. And they're wired to eat everything until they don't understand how to leave food. Or even more simple, the parents going, come on, school bus is coming, hurry up. You're making everyone late. And children naturally eat very slowly. They engage with the food. You know when you're feeding your baby, you've got the next spoon, They're not going to take it till they've done with the first one. But when you make them eat fast and make them eat fast, you wire into them this eating mindlessly without even thinking what's in front of you. Do I want it? Do I like it? I don't know. I just hoover it all up.
This reminds me of, I mean, I grew up, I literally heard these statements every day of my life. You know, I want to go to the store and just get some penny candy. And my mom, you know, I asked my mom for money and she says, you know, I'm broke as a joke.
Yeah.
Was her big thing.
Sure.
That was the classic.
Yeah.
But do I look like I'm made of money?
Of
All these different
course.
statements. And whenever we would have food, because there were times when, you know, we had to get food from WIC program,
Sure.
food stamps, or food pantries. And whenever we'd get a plate of food, she'd say, eat it all.
Yeah, of course.
Eat it all. And
Yeah.
even, and it's like raises that question of like, if we're poor, how is everybody obese?
I know.
Right?
I know.
So that programming, and of course, once I got out of the environment and I decided I'm going to make my life different, even though I was semi-aware that this was a problem, I still repeated those behavior problems, right?
Yeah.
I would come into some money, I would find creative ways to get rid of it,
Of course.
right? So I'm assuming this happens for a lot of people.
70% of lottery winners are dead broke in 3 years. You know, I worked with somebody recently who was working as a we call them dustbinmen, I guess you call them trash collectors.
Yeah.
Anyway, he went from earning $300 a week, he got, on the lottery got $20 million, and within 3 years was dead broke. When I worked with him, he said, but I actually preferred it. I didn't know who I was with all that money. I didn't know who my friends were. You know, if I paid, they'd say I was showing off. If I didn't pay, they're like, you got $20 million. Do you still expect us to chip in? And he said, you know, I didn't enjoy it. But I've also worked with a lot of rock stars who make so much money and are always broke. And when you talk to them about their relationship with money, they'll go, well, you know, my dad got a paycheck on a Friday. It was run out by Thursday night. And so their pattern is you get money and you spend it. And when they win the lottery, they come into that pattern. They just buy stuff they don't need until it's all gone. The 30% who don't go broke when they win the lottery are the ones who already had money, already had a relationship with money and understood. You know, Donald Trump went broke. How fast did he come back? So if you have a template for love or money, you'll keep it. But one of the things about the mind that even psychiatrists aren't trained in, but which I found in my clients, is that we are hardwired to run back to what is familiar while avoiding what is unfamiliar. And that is a tribal behavior. If I live in a tribe and I decide I'm bored, and we used to live in walled cities and they locked the gate at night to keep you safe. Nobody said, oh, this is boring. I want something. No, I think I'll just climb over the gate and go and find another tribe because that was dangerous. We are hardwired to return to what is familiar and to run away from what's unfamiliar, even if it's bad for us. The people who don't have money actually reject money. People who don't have love, they reject love. They go, I don't really want that. I now feel dependent and vulnerable. I'd rather be on my own. And it sounds very hard to understand, but you see this in a 2-year-old. Your 2-year-old child all of a sudden goes, I don't want that yogurt, it's got lumps in it. I don't want that bowl. I only want the pink bowl and the blue spoon. I want the same story every night. I want the same movie every night, because familiar makes them safe. Exactly that age when they could wander out on the prairie and pick their own dangerous berries. They only want what they already know is familiar. And it's the most vexing thing for therapists to say, look, why don't you date a nice guy? Oh, they're too good for me. What they're saying is their behavior is so unfamiliar. I need to run back to what I want. And one of the fastest ways to get what you want in life is to look at your behavior and go, okay, what am I making familiar? I mean, I work with so many clients, movie directors, rock stars, film stars. When I go, I love your movie, they go, it was terrible. Didn't you notice? No, I thought it was amazing. You won an Oscar. I know, but the nominations that year were really bad. But you won another one. I know, but they were really bad that year. And then I go, you know what? You know what's wrong with you? You can't accept praise. Tell me about your life. Well, my dad always said, well, there's nothing to you. You're never going to make it. People like us don't make it. When I made it, he was resentful. But that's not work. Recently, a client said to me, my dad said, you haven't suffered enough to be successful. You don't deserve all this success. You just ponce around making movies. But I drive a cab, I'm successful. What you do doesn't count. If you saw Rocket Man, there's a very sad scene where Elton goes to visit his dad and he says, sign this album. And he says, oh, not for me. I don't even like your music. That's someone at work. So rejecting, withholding parents give their child a familiar. What is familiar is criticism. What is unfamiliar is praise. And what's so tragic is that people who never get praise, when you give them, go, hey, I love your hat. They go, oh, it's not mine. I just found it in a lift. Oh, I love your talk. Oh, I forgot the best bit. So they not only do they reject what is unfamiliar, they add what is familiar, criticism. And people think depression is because of a chemical imbalance in your brain. It really isn't. The number one thing that causes depression are harsh, hurtful, critical words that you say to yourself on a daily basis, and blocking praise while adding in criticism will make anybody depressed.
That's so powerful. And I've got so many different ideas and stories that have come up for me personally and that I've just seen with all the people that I've worked with. But I just want to pivot back to when you said that we are hardwired to do this, and how kids are kind of adverse. They have an adverse response to new things with food, for example.
Of course.
And we just like, why won't the kid just eat?
Yeah.
And I was just with my friend, Shawn T, and he's got twins, and they just turned 2. He knows they'll eat sweet potato and chicken, right? And a lot of times you just want to deal with the fuss, and we did that same thing with my son. And we're, kind of considered nutrition experts. And so it's more of like there's a patience factor, because his little brain is just saying like, I don't know about this.
Exactly.
I don't know what the response is going to be, because some stuff through my evolution could have made me very sick or killed me.
Exactly.
So there has to be a level of patience and understanding. And it's difficult to do when our culture is pushing us to do everything faster. Right? This is blowing my mind.
Yeah, if you one of the things we teach people on RTT is the psychology of human behavior, because we all want to run our mind and run our life. If you want to run your mind, you better understand it. And if you understand your mind, there's only 3 things wrong with everybody. One is I'm not enough. One is I want something that's not available. And the other is I'm different, so I can't connect. Whatever you're treating somebody for, if you're a psychiatrist, a doctor, a mental health worker, you only have to treat those 3 things. And then even better is, I was told that the mind is very complex and it takes a lifetime to understand the workings of your mind and a second lifetime to put it into practice. I'm like, no, that can't be. Nobody would go, hey, Shawn, here's a great brain. Oh my God, your brain's amazing. And you know what? When you're 95, you'll crack it. What a shame it's too late to put it into practice. And I thought that can't be true. And in fact, I'm very lucky that I've traveled all over the world working with everyone from CEOs to billionaires to someone who's got a bakery or is a school teacher. And our brains all work the same. They're very simple. The mind does what it thinks you want based on what you tell it. If you go, that will kill me, I'd die if I do that. I'd rather die than give a speech. Oh my God, I'm so terrified of standing, opening my mouth and sounding stupid. Your mind goes, don't worry, I'll give you a massive panic attack. You'll never get on that stage. When you say, I'll do anything rather than have to have that meeting with my boss next week, your mind goes, how about a chronic bout of diarrhea? If you keep saying, I don't want to do that. I'd do anything not to do that. Or even when you go, I'd love to lie around or with nothing to do, your mind goes, how about the flu? So your mind does what it thinks you want it to do, and it bases it exactly on the words you use and the pictures you make. That's the mind. And if you haven't got what you want in life, your mind thinks you don't want that. And if you've got a lot of things that you don't want, like procrastinating and self-sabotage, I can guarantee you've said somewhere, I'm scared of being successful. What if I eclipse my husband and no guys like wealthy women? Or, if I make it, I'll be a terrible parent. Or if I make it, the stress will make me ill. So if you haven't got what you want, your mind thinks you don't want that. And if you've got a lot of things you'd rather not have, your mind goes, no, you need those. They're very useful to you. People can't reject you now. So your mind does what it thinks you want, always. Even if it's completely wrong, the way you feel about everything is only down to 2 things: the pictures you make in your head and the words you say to yourself. There's nothing else. You know, you could say, God, I'm going to get in this metal tube and hurtle through the air, and that's going to kill me. You could go, oh, wow, I've got 6 hours on a plane. I can watch my favorite movie. I've downloaded my favorite show, can read a book. And we are wired to love what is familiar and avoid what is unfamiliar. That's a fact. But here's an even better fact. You can make anything you like familiar or unfamiliar. You know, shoving a lens in your eye is a very unfamiliar thing to do. No one goes, oh, here's a lens, wham it in. I've done it. Yeah. It takes about 10 days. And then you can do it even without a mirror. You can make anything familiar. And if you want to make something good familiar, make it praise. Because there is nothing on the planet, nothing that will boost your self-esteem like praise. And there's nothing that will wither it like criticism. So many people who go, you know, I could go to a bar, there could be 500 people there. I seem to go home with the one who's abusive and critical. I'm like, well, that's because it's your dad. You know, you're in bed with your dad. You're having sex with your dad. People go, oh, we just clicked. You know, I felt I'd known them my whole life. Well, you did. That was your father, withholding father, or it's very critical mother. But you know what? You can choose to do something else. So when they go, oh, he was too good for me, she was out of my league, what they're saying is, this behavior is unfamiliar. Let me run back to what's familiar. But you can make anything you like familiar. You know, peeing in the toilet wasn't familiar once. Getting a banana in your mouth was not familiar. I mean, I have pictures of my daughter when I first gave her a yogurt. It's in her hair, it's in her ear. But now she can eat a yogurt. You can make anything familiar. And one of the things to do is to go, I will make this familiar. Yeah. So I worked with a girl a little while ago who dated horrible men who hurt her. And her father was super critical, super withholding, and that's the kind of guy she went for. And I said, okay, this is what you do. You say, I am going to make a nice guy familiar. Never add, if it kills me, or if it's the last thing I do. Just say, I'm choosing to make a nice guy familiar. It will feel a little odd, but if you keep saying it, it becomes real. It's no different to saying, you know, I drink tea every day with heavy cream and sugar, and I know it's bad, so I'm going to have black tea or herb tea. And the first time I try to go, oh, this isn't the same. You go, but I'm making it familiar. I'm making it familiar. I'm choosing to like it this way, because when you say to the mind, I'm choosing to say no to candy and yes to fruit, no to donuts and yes to fruit, if you say the words, I'm choosing to do this and choosing to feel great about it, your mind goes, oh, you want this? I'm going to make it happen. When you go, oh, this fruit is so boring, it doesn't taste anything like a donut, your mind goes, go back to what's familiar. So if you want to make something familiar, add in this sentence, I am choosing to make this familiar, and I'm choosing to feel great about it. People even say, you know, I want to go running, but oh, it hurts and my knees hurt. I bought a gym membership, but I don't like it. It's too hard. And if you go, I'm choosing to work out every day. I'm choosing to meditate. I'm choosing to make a NutriBullet instead of a coffee. I'm choosing to eat salad instead of taco chips, and I'm choosing to love it. Your mind will move you towards it like a laser really fast. And if you go, oh, it's not the same, is it? I'm eating this rabbit food now. Who likes that? Your mind will move you away from it. Yeah.
I could speak from experience on that one. I would see, even when I met my wife and we were just dating, she would eat salads. I didn't eat a salad until I was in my mid-20s. And I literally would say, why are you eating that rabbit food? Like, you might as well go outside and grab something off that tree. First of all, what's wrong with that? You know, the tree, whatever's on the tree is probably healthier than, you know, my pasta or whatever. But, you know, it's the language that we use. It just creates an aversion, or it can draw us closer. Sure. So I want to ask you about the ownership language that we use as well. You know, that's something I would see in my practice in the years I was working as a nutritionist. You know, people come in, they say, you know, my diabetes, my heart disease, my cancer, you know, they would really own whatever these different issues is. My depression, my anxiety, my social anxiety. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when you prefix anything with my, you own it. My is an ownership word. And if you put my in front of it, my diabetes, my cancer, my migraine. I need my cookies. I need my Starbucks every morning. If you say that, you own it. And if you call it that's a neutral. You see, women don't like it and go, here's the wife. Because that's insulting. The wife, here's the kids. How about my kids? So if you understand, if you call something you own it. You can go, this is my house, this is my book I wrote, this is my kid. Aren't they great? You don't call something if you're not going to possess it. But don't ever say, I've got my headache again. It's the headache. I've got the headache. I don't own it. It doesn't belong to me. I've got the illness. I've got the tension. My little girl went to visit my mother and came back and went, Mummy, I've got my tension headache. I'm like, no, darling, you're 5 years old. 5-year-olds don't get tension. That's a grandma word. We don't do illness. We don't do pills and medication. But my mother was a massive hypochondriac, and I had to teach my daughter that I've got my irritable bowel, I've got my this. And one day she said to my mum, Grandma, what are all those pills? She goes, well, that's for my headaches. That's for my leg pain. That's for my stomach ache. But Grandma, how do they all know where to go? Which I thought was a great question.
Right.
But if you don't want to own something, never call it my temper. You know, I'm Irish. I've got my temper. I'm Italian, of course. I've got the alcoholic gene. No, you haven't. Genes are only 1% of you. So a very simple thing to do is look at how you speak to yourself, because the words you use are the blueprint for what you are. Take out the word my. You can go, my ambition, my drive, my passion to be a speaker. I got something to say and I can say it. But if you go, oh, I got my nervous stomach now. You know, when I go on stage, my blushing happens, and then I open my mouth and my fear makes me go, and I knew I'd messed that up. No. So put the word my in front of something you want, and put the word the in something you don't want.
Yeah.
But even the words you put in front of it, you can go, I am freaking awesome. That's more powerful than awesome. I'm amazingly driven. I'm super successful. I'm fantastically motivated. That sends a clear message to your mind.
Yeah.
So if you want to have a mindset and you want to dialogue with your mind, here's a couple of things to understand. The mind only works in the present tense. You can't go, next year I'll be rich, next year I'll have a bikini body, next year I'll have a great relationship, because your mind doesn't even know what that is. It has to be now. I'm successful now, I'm healthy now, even though it isn't true. It must be in the present tense. It must make a picture, saying every day in every way, my life is better. I call that a WTF expression. What does that even mean? Life is a walk through a garden. No, it isn't. Sometimes it's raining and you step in dog mess. So that's not true. But if you say, okay, I'm motivated. I love what I do. I'm on fire with passion. I love spending the whole weekend working on my website. I'm thrilled to be an RTT therapist. I've got something to share with the world, and I'm amazingly super successful. And mine goes, oh, your words are telling me very clearly what you want. Present tense, exciting words. Put exciting words in front of the words. So if you go, I'm not bad me, I have good days and bad days, that's a WTF. If you go, I am motivated, passionate, I've got a gift, I've got a skill all of mine, and I'm monetizing that gift every day. I'm doing it right now. Your mind goes, your words are telling me exactly where you want to go, and I'm going to take you there. But if your words are vague, your mind goes, well, I'm stuck here now because I don't really understand what you want. So people go, you know, I want a wild, passionate. So, for instance, I used to live in Notting Hill. It's got lots of rock stars there. My friend lived in a street with this rock star, and she used to sing this song, I want that guy. And she said, I want him. I want him in my bed. I want that guy. And actually, it wasn't that difficult. He got drunk one day, pressed the wrong doorbell, and she got him in her bed, and they had a great night. She never saw him again. I'm like, why didn't you go? I want that guy for life. Our souls are going to collide. We're going to bump into each other. He's going to fall in love with him. I'm going to fall in love with him. We'll be together forever. You said, I want that guy for a night of passion. And you got it. You're a great manifester, but you could have kept the manifestation going. People go, I want more money. Well, here's $5. No, I don't want that. People say to me, I want to be pregnant. I go, really? That's all I want? I said, I don't think so. You could be pregnant 6 times and never have a baby. If you say, I want to be pregnant, that's what you get. How about I want to create a perfect, healthy, robust, perfect baby? In fact, I insist on, I require my body to give me a perfect pregnancy, to grow a perfect baby who's going to be born full term. Perfect. Your mind goes, I understand what you want. I thought you just wanted to be pregnant. But now I see you want a perfect, robust, healthy, full-term baby. And you can add in, I can have a fantastic, easy birth too. Because if you tell your mind what you want and you put in the detail, it gives you what you want. But if you don't, it's like going to a restaurant and going, hey, can you bring me some food? And going, oh, I didn't want that.
Right.
Well, you get what you ask for. Yeah. I didn't want that. I don't like that sauce. It's like saying to someone, I'm going away, could you paint my house? They go, I didn't want that. But you didn't tell them what you wanted.
Ah, I love
detail. Detailed words. You know, people think this is affirmations. It's not. It's a detailed, relevant, up-to-date dialoguing with your mind using specific, exciting words. You know, Muhammad Ali said, hey, I said I was the greatest before I even knew I was, but I said it. Yeah. I'm the greatest, and something amazing happened. I became the greatest. I wasn't when I said it, and then I was. He could have said, I'm not bad me. I have good days and bad days, but where would that have taken him? See, when you see people who really make it, they dialogue with their mind in a very interesting way. People go, oh, well, they're born like that. So what? You can adopt it. You can make it your own. You don't have to be born with it. You just have to think, well, if that's what successful people do, why don't I do it too? And then I'll be successful. And that's absolutely true.
You mentioned a great story about your mom and the pill assortment and your daughter's experience. Yeah. So I'm wondering, what was the catalyst for you? Like, all of these incredible insights that you've shared with people and that you're helping so many with, I'm assuming that you've utilized these things in your own life. Yeah. And then how did you go from whatever work you did for yourself to wanting to help other people?
We see my family. My mother was evacuated in the war in England. You sent children away from the cities into the countryside, and they lived with complete strangers. And she learnt very early on that if she got sick, her parents would come to visit. They had no money at all, so being sick was very useful. It met her needs. When you have children with unmet needs, they very often become sick because it's the quickest way of meeting that need. So I grew up with a mother who was always sick and a father who loved his job and was never sick. And I realized very early on that when you have a brilliant brain, which we all have, you can choose, rationalize why you feel so bad, or talk yourself out. I had one parent who always rationalized, oh, the weather's changing, I'm going to get sick now. This is all going to go wrong. This will all end in tears. My mother was a master in rationalizing everything would go wrong, and my father was a master. I never get sick. My body would never get sick. I love my job too much. Those kids need me. He was never sick a day in his life. My mother was always sick. It was an interesting home to be brought up in. And I realized very early on, your words shape your reality. If you don't like your reality, change your language. Rationalize why you feel so bad. Talk yourself out of it. This freeway is killing me. Or, hey, I've got a car. I got money to pay in gas. That's someone else's fantasy dream come true. What would you have given 10 years ago with this problem that you got to commute to a job and you moan and bitch about it? Oh, the freeway is killing me. This job is too much. I'm dying under my paperwork. I'm at my maximum bandwidth. I can't take it. And well, of course you can. It's someone else's fantasy. And so that was very interesting to me, to understand that you can choose how you feel about anything. I mean, after all, if you decided to get a whole sleeve of tattoos down your arm, would you go going, hey, is this going to hurt me? They go, of course it's going to hurt. It's going to take you a year to get that tattoo done. But some people choose to love pain. How weird is that? I'm choosing to love tattoos. I love a bit of pain. I love endurance training. I love pushing myself to the limit. But you see how they choose it. And other people go, I couldn't do that. That would kill me. No. So you got to understand that you should be your own best friend and talk to yourself better. And so, you know, I wasn't destined to be successful. My brother went to a private school. I didn't. My parents tried to train me to be a nanny because I was told I would never make it. But I realized very early on that that's not up to anyone else. That's up to me. And when I was told I could never have a baby, would never get pregnant, couldn't carry a baby to full term, I heard a voice in my head going, don't let that in. And much, much later I had cancer and I heard the same thing. Well, my doctor said, it's got your name and address, it will probably come back. And I thought, what a terrible thing to do to someone, to actually knock on the table and go, well, it knows where you live. It's probably going to come back. I'm like, no, it's not coming back. I'm never having that come back. So we get to choose. And one of the biggest things to choose is don't give your power to someone else. No one can tell you how to feel. You're never going to find love because you're not a supermodel. No one's going to love you because you're not wealthy. You're never going to make it because we're not the kind of family where we can send you to college. We hear all these limiting beliefs as kids. Why can't you be like your sister? She's not messy. Look at your cousin. She could read when she was 4. We buy into I'm not enough. And I'm enough will change your entire life because what lies beneath addictions, hoarding, compulsive shopping, neediness is a belief I'm not enough and I need more. That might be more food, maybe more drugs, maybe more praise, it may be more stuff. But if that stuff could make you feel enough, why do you need more? Yeah. And if you understand that when you think you're not enough, you will always need more. And when you know you're enough, you don't need more, but you think, oh, I deserve a better relationship than this. I deserve a better career than this. I deserve more because I'm worth it. And so if you want to change your life, join the I Am Enough movement. Write it on your mirror. Say it every day. What else are you going to say when you're cleaning your teeth? I like this minty toothpaste. How about looking in the mirror and going, oh, look, that's in lipstick or eyeliner or marker pen. I'm enough. Wire it in. Put it on your fridge and fridge magnets. Put it on your phone so it alerts you twice a day. Change all your passwords securely, of course. Because have you got that? Absolutely. But you'd never work it out because it's got squiggles and dots and capitals and a weird spelling. But I type out every day, I'm enough. I read it every day. One of my clients, amazingly, had it printed on her kids' pillowcases. So they read that every morning and every night. And these kids were being bullied, and it changed everything. It was a game changer for them. So if you can accept that a lot of our unhappiness comes from believing we're not enough, but we're not born with that belief, then you can accept, okay, if I say I'm enough, it will change my life. Absolutely. And what's it going to cost you anyway? It's free, it's easy, it's effortless, and it's a game changer.
Yeah. I love this so much. I've got one other topic I want to ask you about. I've got so many things I want to ask you,
Sure.
But I definitely don't want to move past this one because I feel that for a lot of people, this is something that keeps them in a kind of chronic state of fear, but they might not realize it. And there's this concept in our culture that, for example, once an addict, always an addict.
Of course.
Right? Or for me, just to give an example, I grew up in a violent atmosphere, like if there was a problem, you get hit. Like if you do something bad, you get hit very quickly.
Yeah.
And so I repeated that behavior like with my little brother and sister. They do something out of line, I hit them. We take that outside. Like when I was 4 years old, my mother pushed me into my first fight. And I've got this huge scar on the back of my head to prove it. But she was trying to teach me to be a strong person, never back down. These seemingly good lessons through a really crappy method of teaching. And so throughout the rest of my life, after coming back from that moment of like going to the hospital, getting my head stitched up, I was on the table, they had to put me to sleep, but just screaming like, I'll get him, Mom, I'll get Alfonso. And the next day or two, he was digging a hole, and I clocked him with this Tonka trunk, and I felt so proud of myself.
Yeah, of course.
But that elicited a lifetime of problem solving through violence. And so whenever something would happen, whether it's at school, it's just like, oh, well, I'm going to have to kick his ass now, or the kid across the street, my brother is out throwing the football around, and it hits his tire, and he says something to him. I'm just like, if he says something else to my brother, I'm gonna have to kick his ass, And I live my life like that, And for a while, I didn't, even if I remove myself from the environment, I still have those thoughts. Like I can't be around people or be around this without expressing violence. Like once a violent person, always a violent person. But is that real, or is that something that we kind of like, once an addict, always an addict, and we just kind of have to remove ourselves from the environment?
Yeah, see, I don't like that. I know that AA does good work, but that expression, I'm an alcoholic and I always will be, is a blueprint. I'm an alcoholic, I always will be. I can't attract love and I never will. My dad left when I was 2, so therefore I don't amount to anything, and that will always be the way. And we can look at Marilyn Monroe, Princess Diana. We can look at Heath Ledger, we can look at Michael Jackson, we can look at these amazing, Whitney Houston, Amy Winehouse, all had this belief, I'm not really lovable. I got to earn love, chase love, buy love, run after love, because I'm not worthy. And that's not true. But here's a great saying: we play the only part we've ever known. And then we make that part our own. But sometimes you've got to go, well, I'm not playing this part anymore. Yeah. You know, I don't have to play the part of the stupid, ugly kid who thought she was a freak and was only going to be a nanny and thought, well, if I can never have my own kid, maybe that's a good job. I did momentarily look at that and think, I can't have children. It'd be a great job being a nanny, raising other people's. You know, your parents and mine, no parent wakes up and goes, okay, where's Google? I need to Google how to damage my kid for the rest of their life right now. Let me Google how to mess up my kid. The worst parents in the world don't have those intentions. If they knew better, they would do better. You know, your childhood, if you think of your life as a clock, your childhood is the first 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, you learned violence. I learned that I was stupid and inadequate and hideously ugly. But then we both decided, well, that's the first 10 minutes. I got 50 minutes left. Why would I make the first 10 minutes color my whole life? I have a choice to stop believing what somebody told me. And someone told them, it's like that song, you know, we fuck up our kids. We do not mean to, but we do. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools who half the time were happy and half the time at each other's throats. So your parents are a different generation. My grandparents, they used to say things like, never show people you've got money because they won't like you. And they never, you know, draw attention to yourself because the Bible says the meek will inherit the earth. Well, by the way, meek means spiritual people. It doesn't mean passive people who keep everything in. So you got to think, you know, I don't like these beliefs. I'm going to have some new beliefs here. I'm going to give myself a better belief. You are what you believe. But here's something that you can make any belief you like. I'm going to be an Olympic athlete. I'm going to make it. You know, Meryl Streep, when she went to audition for King Kong, they went, Meryl, you're not pretty. You'll never make it as an actress. Go home. And she said, well, that's one opinion. In a sea of opinions, I think I'll find a different opinion. And thank goodness she did. Because if you ever saw in my favorite movie, Out of Africa, where Robert Redford is washing her hair, she looks beautiful. But even if she wasn't beautiful, she's a gifted, talented actress with something to share. But it's very easy to hear, you'll never make it, you're not enough, you haven't got the talent, you haven't got the background. And that's another factor that causes depression, not following your heart's desire. So you have to make a decision. Shall I go on believing this belief? Or shall I believe something else? And the most successful people haven't always had a degree or a charmed life or a wealth life, but they have had an ability to go, I'm not going to believe this anymore. If I make my beliefs and then my beliefs turn around and make me, it's my job to make better beliefs. People say, isn't it that simple? Yeah. You know, your thoughts control your feelings control your actions control your events. You can't control anything except your thoughts, and when you control them, it changes your entire life, especially if you make them good thoughts, because we all get to choose. I'm going to have a bad day, it's raining, my flight's late, they've lost my luggage, everything is going to go wrong. I'm going to go, well, you know what? I have great coping skills. I can deal with this. Yeah, I'm stuck in traffic for an hour, but hey, I've got something in my a thing I've always wanted to listen to. I've got some food in my glove box and I've got a great web download. I can listen to Shawn for an hour in this traffic. You see how the choosing is the key. You can always choose, this is terrible, everything is going to, you go, hey, I can still feel great about this.
You know, people say that, like, you're so disciplined, you write all this stuff and you do all these things. And it's like, I tell them, I'm like, no, I'm not I'm not any more disciplined than anybody else. What I have done, though, is I have been very honest with myself about my flaws and my tendencies to cut corners and shortcut, and, you know, and as a result of that, I can put myself in proximity to the things that I want to do. So for instance, in that particular dose of inspiration you're referring to, I mentioned writing my first book and how that process actually happened, because it was like I was dragging my feet. It was a self-published thing. I was dragging my feet for 3.5 years, you know, working on it a little bit here, a little bit there, but never really getting momentum on it, and just tired of thinking about it after a while. And my buddy Drew, who you know, I came to him one day with a contract that I had made out and a check for $4,000, post-dated for 3 months from that day. And the contract said, Drew, I'm giving you this check for $4,000, post-dated to such and such date. My agreement is to finish this book that I'm working on. If I don't finish it, and if it's not ready to literally go to print by that date, you are obligated to take this check for $4,000 and cash it and spend it on whatever you want. And then he signed it and I signed it, right? So now after that, there's no way I wasn't going to finish that book, because I couldn't afford to lose $4,000. Yeah. And I ended up finishing it like a week early, just in case, you know, anything happened. I didn't want any ambiguity or anything like that. And so that was a way to kick my own ass into finishing that project. And then I talked about, you know, working out. Like, I work out all the time. I love working out, but I don't love driving to the gym. I don't love having to like work out by myself. And I know that if that's the circumstance, I'm probably going to talk myself out of it if I'm a little bit busy. But if I find a place that's close to where I'm living and maybe that has group workouts, then I'm way more inclined to go. And so that's what I did. I found a place that was, you know, had a group workouts that I could join, and it was within walking distance, and I started working out all the time. And then one of the other examples was junk food, like eating better. And I said, I know myself. I know if I go to the grocery store and I'm hungry, I'm going to end up with a shopping cart full of stuff that I probably shouldn't be eating, right? And I'll have all kinds of really important justifications for it as well, because that's what happens in the brain. So I know that I need to eat something before I walk into a grocery store. And if I can just make sure I eat something, even if what I eat before I go in there isn't the greatest, but then it's going to positively impact what I put in the shopping cart. So those kinds of things, you know, that anybody can do. And I'm really big on pulling the veil back and showing people behind the curtain, because I don't want anybody thinking I'm special or I'm like somehow more gifted or have more access to inspiration than anyone else. It's like, no, I just have done these things. Like with meditation, I struggled for 3 or 4 years to meditate. The reason why I'm so accessible now as a meditation teacher is because I paid somebody a lot of money at the time to show me the nuts and bolts of this practice so I could really understand it inside and out. And it changed my entire relationship with meditation. And I literally went from a reluctant meditator who was doing it sometimes to an enthusiastic daily meditator. And that person eventually ended up teaching me how to teach other people how to meditate. But it was all, you know, very, very pricey, you know, but it's something that I was so passionate about. And as a result, I became very good at it. And now I help other people get very good at meditation. So yeah, it's just about being honest with myself about where I am.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And you just gave so many good examples. One of those is, you know, putting a risk in front of you, a loss if you don't follow through. Another one is an investment that you make, making you more accountable.
That's right.
It's basically understanding yourself, understanding your strengths and weaknesses as you talk about. And the thing is, we know ourselves, we know those spots. But I think a lot of times we give a lot more credit to our weaknesses. Mm-hmm. We don't acknowledge our strengths. Mm-hmm. And within those weaknesses, we just generally use them as an out rather than using them as an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things, and this, you say this specifically in the book, you say, are you lacking in discipline in certain areas of your life? If so, that just means you're normal. And in the context of habit change, and I want to talk more about this, asking ourselves with this habit change that we want, is it a proximity issue? Is there a way to bring it closer? And so for you with the gym, like you would like to work out, but you know, if things start to get busy, it'll hit a lower tier of importance and it'll just kind of eliminate itself. But if you know, for example, that it's really close, or in this context, I want to ask you about, if somebody's wanting to have a habit change of just a generally healthier lifestyle, how can you get in proximity to that? For me, I'm a big fan of people and being around, if you're wanting to change your health, getting yourself around healthier people, getting yourself in proximity of that thing. So can you talk a little bit more about proximity?
Yeah, well, I actually have there's another one in here that I think is really the root cause, because you mentioned it at the very beginning of this conversation. You talked about stress. You asked me about stress. And I would say that stress is really the root cause of why we put ourselves either further away from whatever it is that we say we want to do, or we create these crazy excuses for them. Would you mind if I read it? It's really short.
Please do.
This one is called So Gullible, and I think it'll explain everything. So people think meditation makes you gullible, but it's actually stress that makes you gullible. Stress makes you crave French fries, cookies, and wine. Stress makes you come up with important sounding excuses about why you can't exercise. Stress makes you think the reason you're tossing and turning at night is because you don't have the right mattress. Stress keeps you locked in codependent relationships with emotionally unavailable partners. Stress makes you do foolish things that you have to apologize for later. Stress even makes you think you're incapable of meditating because your mind is too busy. Meanwhile, meditation makes you bold. Meditation makes it hard to put up with somebody else's. Meditation makes it almost impossible to remain in a dead-end job or in a bad relationship. Meditation makes you stand up for others and follow your heart with no fallback plan. Meditation allows you to be guided by your intuition instead of your fear. Meditation helps you accept others and let go of the need to control. It's meditation that helps you sleep like a baby, even though you don't have it all figured out. So it's really stress, man. It really comes down to, like, you know, when you have a lot of stress, you're going to talk yourself out of doing the things that you know deep down, I should be moving my body more. I really should be eating more plants. I really should be forging more meaningful relationships. I don't want to be on social media for hours at a time. I don't want to be watching pornography all the time. I don't want to be gossiping all the time. You know, all these things that we do in the moment is kind of like junk food, but then it makes us feel terrible afterward. That's all stress based. So when we can get that stuff out in whatever ways we are able to get it out, you know, I recommend meditation, but again, that's not the only way. Then naturally, as a byproduct, it makes you want to work out. You want to go move your body, right? Because you don't have that stress weighing you down saying, nah, just stay on the couch. You know, you don't need to go anywhere. You worked too hard at your job this week, you know, just chill out, have a donut, have some wine, you know, that kind of stuff. So I think instead of trying to, you know, find hacks for going and doing the things we're supposed to do, just get the stress out. If you get the stress out, then your natural inclination will be to do all the things that you naturally want to do deep down.
I would think that this would make it easier to access inspiration, because ultimately 100%. This is what your book is really helping us to cultivate. So could you talk a little bit about your definition or your perception of what inspiration is, first and foremost.
Yeah, man. So inspiration is it's a Latin word, root word. It means to blow into. And that what that indicates is that there are ideas that come into us. They're divine ideas that come to us. And it initiates some sort of activity or way of thinking about something or a feeling tone. And I think the mistake that we make with inspiration is we think we have to go out and find it, right? But what I'm helping the reader do is to cultivate it within. That's why, again, it's called knowing where to look, is because instead of looking outside of yourself for this, it's really about redirecting the attention back into your own life experience. Like, you don't have to be Shawn Stevenson. You don't have to be Light Watkins in order to find inspiration. You don't have to even, go out and exercise in order to be inspired. It's the inspiration that initiates the thought to go and exercise, or the thought to go and do these other things that you naturally want to do, paint pictures and, go give a TED talk, or it's that the inspiration is actually the root cause. What we have to do is we have to facilitate it. And the way you facilitate it really is just by being present to it. So then how do you become present to it? Well, most of us in our normal conventional society are not very present. We're just not. We're either thinking about something in the future or we are regretting something from the past. But very few people are actually in the present moment. And so the ways we can cultivate that in very simple, easy, accessible ways, it's not rocket science. Again, it's just, gratitude is one easy way. You don't have to sit and meditate. Just be grateful. Like, literally list 5 things you're grateful for in this moment. And if you can't think about 5 things you're grateful for, list 5 things you can notice in this moment. What is it? What is the taste? What is the smell, the sight, sound, the feeling? Bring that into the moment. And what happens is you start to see inspiration that's been hiding all around you in plain sight. And it just may be the way the color falls on the wall in front of you, or it could be a sound that you weren't aware of before. And then you get these little tiny mini impulses. And the impulse may be get up and go out to the backyard with your shoes off and just ground. And you're like, that's weird. Like, that's our initial reaction. No, that's weird. I'm going to look weird. Everyone's going to think I'm weird, right? But here's the thing. When we think about the concept of inspiration, people think, okay, if I'm inspired, that's going to cause me to go and do this thing, and I'm going to start this company, and I'm going to be successful. It's like, no, that's not how inspiration works. Inspiration, the way you know you're being inspired is it challenges you. It challenges you. It's gonna nudge you in the direction of something that stretches you. Just like me writing these daily emails. Like, when I got that idea, I was like, oh, my first reaction is, because there was a combination of excitement around it. Just like if you were going to be in a Iron Man or something like that, like, there's some excitement, but then there's this other side to it, which is like, this thing is going to break me. I don't know if I'm ready for that, So that's how it's legitimate inspiration. Like, that's kind of on a bigger scale of inspiration, but a smaller scale of inspiration, everybody's had this experience, right? You're in an elevator. Someone is next to you. What do people do in an elevator? They either look at the numbers or they look down at the floor. You rarely acknowledge the other person, right? And maybe you're looking down at the floor. Fine, right? That's what we all do. Maybe you notice this person is wearing Yves Saint Laurent shoes. And you're like, wow, those are some cool ass Yves Saint Laurent high tops. And look at the paint splashes on this brother's jeans. This dude has got style, right? You having this whole conversation to yourself, beard is on point, everything. And so something inside of you may say, just, compliment the dude. Nah, that's going to sound, you start working on your mind, starts working on you. Your ego starts working on you. I'm going to look silly. I'm going to look gay. I'm going to look this. I'm going to look that. It's like, just go with the impulse, whatever it is, right? And if you can get used to going with it and listening to it and acting upon it in the little times, and you do that over and over and over, then when you get the big impulse, write the daily email, quit the dead-end job, explore a different way of relating to your partner, go camping, even though you've never been camping, all these bigger things, then you're more inclined to do those things. And then ultimately it culminates into, maybe go nomadic or whatever your version of that is, right? Which is, start this nonprofit but here's the other thing. It's almost always about service. Ultimately, when you extrapolate any inspiration, it's about service. Like complimenting you is less about my ego and it's more about just acknowledging the effort that you are giving to the world, right? That's service. That's a service. That's an act of service or an act of kindness, whatever you want to call it. And it's not about me, right? And that's how that's how you can separate is this an ego impulse or an inspiration impulse? Because there's different voices in there too. And you have to split test it. And you're not always going to get it right. Sometimes it will be an ego inspired action. And you'll learn from that. You'll learn, okay, that's how that made me feel. It wasn't the best feeling compared to when I'm really inspired and acting in service to other people. That makes me feel much better. And so maybe in the beginning years, when you're really intentional about it, 6 out of the 10 times that you're acting on these impulses, they're inspired. And then the other 4 out of 10 times they're ego driven. And so then the next year you're at 7 out of 10 and the next year. So take the long view, right? This is a never ending process. It's ever refining and you just get better and better at recognizing it. And then you get better at trusting it. And then ultimately you get better at following it. And when you can follow it, you won't know what's going to happen. That's part of the deal. That's how you know it's inspiration. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I'm going to write these emails. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I did not set out 5 years ago to write a book called Knowing Where to Look. And this is what I'm going to do to practice it. I just was following it. I was scared, I was scared I was going to run out of material within the first month, which happened. But, you don't get, I wouldn't have understood that it was going to come through me until I actually put in those first 3 weeks. And then I got the next step in the blueprint, right? And that's what's so beautiful about it because it turns into this adventure.
Yeah, it brought qualities out of you that you didn't know that were dormant.
It made me have to look actively for inspiration in every experience I was in. I could have been in the hospital, wherever I was. I had to attune my ears and my eyes to something that I felt naturally inspired by.
And they were already present. That's the beautiful part about it too. Mm-hmm. This is I've never heard this before put framed like this, but this kind of brings to mind that so many things in our lives they function sort of like a muscle, and it's that use it or lose it. And it's also, if you work on the thing, you become stronger and more versed at it. So working on our inspiration muscles, essentially. And so I love that exercise of doing the small thing when you feel that. But also here's the big thing too. When you said it earlier, this is going to make you uncomfortable or this is going to stretch you, I immediately thought oh, people not going to like that. We don't like that. We are, funny enough, we want change, but we don't want to change, and change of ourselves and our character is often required, always required for something new, that thing that we might aspire to. So getting to that place, and I love that you giving us that gift of just working, do the small inspiration to build that muscle, because you creating the life that you want and tapping into those big inspirational hits that we all get, we've got to be more comfortable with knowing that we're going to be stretched. Mm-hmm. So that's incredibly powerful. Now I've got to ask you this question, because you mentioned how earlier we can get kind of distracted. We can get pulled out of the present, which I would think a lot of the inspiration is going to be more accessible in the now. Mm-hmm. How do you feel that our really fast-paced way of living, in a sense, and also our constant stream of media and social media, can muffle our accessibility to inspiration?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways to get distracted from it. Alcohol distracts us from it. Any substances will distract you from it. That basically anything that takes you out of the present moment. So the news, as you've posted recently, is 90% negative. So, you know, when you're in that space, now you're in stress mode, and stress mode means fight or flight, which means anything but the present moment. And so, you know, but it's tough to expect people to just, who's been obsessed with the news for decades, to just stop watching the news. It's probably not going to happen. So then it comes back to whatever your foundational practices are, you know. So if you can, and this is the displacement theory, right? Don't worry about changing your lifestyle at all. Just keep doing what you're doing. And then add in one practice, just one practice, whether it's gratitude. I like gratitude because it's something you don't have to sit and close your eyes to do, although you can. All you need is, you don't have to write anything down. You have your thoughts. You just consciously place your thoughts on item after item or experience after experience that you're grateful for. And it shifts you. It shifts you. Another one is breath work, right? Again, you don't have to be a master or guru or anything. You can just breathe. Everyone can breathe deep. You can breathe inhale. You can inhale deeply. You can exhale deeply. You can do that 10 times. It will shift you. And if you have an inclination to sit and close your eyes for 5 or 10 minutes, it will shift you. And if you do those things regularly enough, you will feel less inclined to do the other things over time. It won't happen overnight, but over time, you'll feel less inclined to watch all that negativity in the media and to consume all the, you know, junk, whether it's food or whether it's information. And then gradually, you'll find yourself more inclined to follow the voice of inspiration as well.
Yeah. You won't have to force yourself.
You don't ever have to force yourself.
Because it just won't fit anymore.
No. But here's the other thing. It's happening anyway. It's going to happen. On my podcast, At the End of the Tunnel, I just interviewed this guy named Marlon Peterson, who's doing amazing work with kids. He's got these youth programs, mentoring kids. You know, came up very tough in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and got robbed and beat up and bullied and all the things during his childhood. Marlon ended up getting involved in a robbery when he was 19 years old, which then took him to prison for 12 years. He got sentenced 12 years in prison, spent 10 years in prison. That's where he discovered his calling, in prison, right? And so life is usually taking you in one of two directions. It's taking you the pain route, and that's how you're going to find your inspiration. Or you can kind of catch the wave of inspiration earlier, which takes you on the adventure route, which means I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I'm trusting because this is lighting my heart up. So I'm trusting that when I keep taking steps in this direction, and it's scary too. Prison is scary and the adventure route is scary. They're both going to be scary routes, right? But the adventure route is a lot more enjoyable ultimately.
You're microdosing the pain.
Yeah, you're microdosing. You're almost kind of putting yourself in that situation. So, you know, you really, it's embedded within your spiritual DNA to find your passion, your purpose, your calling. The question is, how do you want to get there? Do you want to go the easy way or do you want to go the hard way? You know, because they're both taking you there. It's just one looks like it's the funny thing about it is the easy way, that what looks like the easy way is actually the hard way. What looks like the hard way, the uncomfortable way, because you actually have to choose the discomfort. That's actually the fast track. That's the easy route. That's the adventure route.
Going from funnily enough, in the early 80s, where we thought the brain couldn't change, we had a better approach with mental health than we have now, where we know the brain can change. And I did some of the first neuroplasticity research in the world in my field in the 80s. And that was that time when I was told it was ridiculous. And it was only the mid-90s that people actually accepted that the brain could change. So it just shows you how recent it is. And so clinically, it's affected how people practice. So I've watched people going from having a holistic approach, looking at the person in context, their whole story, if someone's battling with whatever they're battling with, and also separating out things like, kind of looking at the whole person. So if you're battling with learning and you're battling with emotions, what happened? Not just lumping a label on because of the symptom. It was never, oh, you're battling with learning, you're battling with behavioral issues, and you're feeling very depressed. Okay, so you're clinically depressed, you have a learning disability, here's the medication. That's today. Then it was a narrative of, okay, well, let's look at the whole story. Let's bring in the whole team. What happened to you? How can we address that backstory? And that changed over the last 38 years with the advances of our understanding of the human brain, which we needed. With the advances in brain science, technology, medicine, this has taken us leaps into the future. But we've paid a huge price, and I talk about that in the book too. And that huge price is that we've forgotten about the narrative of the person. And there's very few clinicians and people in the field, and I mean, Daniel, and myself and a few others are like, there's honestly, there's more now. But at one stage, there was, the going belief is that if you have depression, it's considered something like diabetes, and there's a chemical imbalance. And I mean, none of this is scientific. None of it's been proven. All of it is looking for some sort of neurobiological correlate that caused this depression. So it's like you've got this brain disease, and that's why you're depressed. No, you don't have a brain disease and that's making you depressed. You can have one and that can contribute, and there could be a tumor or something like that. But your mind is the overarching concept here. So you're a person who's experienced maybe trauma or abuse or whatever it may be, or COVID and grief and loss and financial. So when we're feeling mental health challenges, those are not illnesses. They are actually responses, and they are symptoms of an underlying issue, and they're warning signals that we need to listen to. And if we don't listen to them and we just stick a label on, and people take that on as their identity, it changes the brain, it changes the body, and I'll show you how in a moment. But what essentially that does is in the context of psychology and in population statistics and what happens to humanity is when you ignore a person's story and you don't allow a person to express and find the cause and the origin, what you do is remove a whole component of a person's functioning. You literally ignore 90% of how they're functioning. You focus just on the biological, which works great if you've got heart disease or something physically wrong with your body. But when we've got a story in our life, which all of us do have, we have to focus on that. So we see what we saw happening from the mid-90s when neuroplasticity was at its sort of accepted and growing. We saw that leap in medicine, technology, neuroscience. We saw a backward movement, however, in mind. So people then started cutting out the story of mind and saying, well, we can't really measure it. So let's focus just on the biology. Let's make everything about the biology of the brain, and it's brain, and forget all about the experience. And that has resulted in a current trend that people don't talk about enough, but it's called deaths of despair. And what is happening now in our current age in 2021, and it started in 96 and it peaked, it was really identified between 14 and 15, and it's a massive problem currently, and that is that people are dying 8 to 25 years younger than they should from preventable lifestyle diseases and disorders. And that's tracked back to the mid-90s. So what I'm saying in total here is that for decades we've been improving the trend of people living longer. For decades people have been living longer because of advances, but that reversed in the mid-90s, and by the mid-2000s it was solid in science. So people are dying younger than they should with advances. There's a paradox, and we have to ask ourselves, how can that happen? It's contradictory. It doesn't work, but it is. And it's happening because of preventable stuff, preventable lifestyle diseases. So when we think of lifestyle, we think of food and diet and exercise, and stress management, and it's kind of a little category popped in there. But actually each one of those things is driven by mind. So we've got to relook at the whole concept. It's not that mind is just part of a list of things. Mind is driving all those things. Your mind never stops for 3 seconds. We can go without food for 3 weeks. We can go without water for 3 days. We can go without oxygen for 3 minutes. We don't even go 3 seconds without our mind working. Your mind mind is the source of everything. So your mind is the source of what you choose to eat and the nutritional benefit you get from what you're eating. You can lose up to 80% of the nutritional benefit just by being in a toxic, unforgiving, or bitter or angry state, which affects your pancreas, for example, and it doesn't secrete neuropeptides that you should have. And there's a whole bunch of stuff. So your mind is driving your digestive system. Your mind drives the benefit that you get down to the level of your DNA out of exercise. Your mind is driving how you manage that next argument, that next podcast, that next interaction, that response to the news. Your mind is always working. So if we don't deal with mind, or we eliminate mind and just try and label people from a symptom, we are going to land up with what we have, people dying younger than they should. And mankind advancing with technology, but going backwards with who we are as humans. And that's where we are currently. And then COVID hit. That was already happening. And then COVID hit.
Right.
And COVID is forcing us to, it has added to the problem, but it's also forcing us to shift. And it's going to bring us back to the 70s and 80s and 50s and 60s, where we started looking at the human again. So it's had a very negative effect and a very positive effect. And not many people talk about the positive effect. So in conclusion to that question, was a long answer. When you identify with, if someone says you have clinical depression from a list of symptoms, and they diagnose, so symptom, 15 minutes, diagnosis, label, medication, or maybe a bit of therapy, or maybe a bit of both, you immediately change the way that your brain functions. You start your frontal, I'm just going to give you simple versions. For example, your frontal lobe, as soon as you get that kind of negative label, you get less oxygen and blood flow to the front of your brain, literally immediately. Your identity gets stuck in being in a very negative identity. So you have that creates imbalance between the two sides of the brain. So identifying with a toxic label that doesn't actually make sense will affect the functionality of your ability to make decisions and think with cognitive flexibility, and right down to the level of impacting intelligence. And I show that in my research. When you actually show a person how to shift their identity and not see themselves as a label. So instead of saying, I am depressed, like that's me, I've got clinical depression, you rather say to help them to see, empower them to see that, no, you aren't depression. You're experiencing depression, which is totally okay, totally understandable. And if you grab that depression and look at it, you'll find a message in the depression. You are simply responding in a normal way to an adverse circumstance. When you change that, you change everything about the brain, the body, right down to the level of the telomeres. So there's another long answer.
Yeah, so good. I'm loving this so much. And even just tickling with the telomeres there at the end. It's so good. Telomeres. Now, this is one of the most powerful things I've continued to reiterate for years, just because, again, the data exists. Every thought that we have creates correlating chemistry in our body. Yes. So when you're talking about mind creates your brain, mind creates your body. But with that said, one of the most powerful things that we do, but often unconsciously do, is we accept these labels. And there's this, it's kind of a personal development statement, but there's science behind it. When you label me, you negate me.
Exactly.
Right? When you label me, you negate me. And we literally are changing. And by the way, if you guys aren't watching the video version and seeing Dr. Leaf picking up the brain and pointing to the different regions, make sure to check the video out. Super cute. That's a nice brain.
It is a nice brain. I like it too. I have a few in here, and there's another one in here. It's a body with a brain. I love brains. They're all over my office.
She's got brains everywhere. So here's the thing, though, is that when we subscribe to a label, it's changing our chemistry. It's changing our biology. And so once we take that on, and by the way, the label, and I love the fact that you point to data, and I love this repeatedly. You're just look at the results. We have more antidepressants and antipsychotics than ever before, yet they haven't reduced the prevalence of any of these mental health issues at all. Something is clearly wrong.
They've made them worse.
Yeah.
We have a worse problem. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. But we have a worse problem now than we had when in the late 80s, sort of mid 80s, was when Prozac was released. And it was in the 50s that the first antipsychotic was discovered by mistake. They basically, as all psychotropics are anesthetics. They're versions of anesthetics. So they basically numb the brain. So we're sitting now as part of the reason why people are dying 18 to 25 years younger. Part of it is not helping people manage mind, just stuffing down the symptoms with a drug. And those drugs change the brain. They're psychoactive, which means that they alter the brain chemistry, and not in a good way. And yes, maybe someone is having a complete psychotic break and they're danger to themselves and they may need to be sedated for a 24-hour period, or just for it, like you have surgery, you have an anesthetic. You have it for that need. But it's not, these drugs should not be used beyond a need. They're not fixing a problem. But what they've done is they've created a problem. So Shawn, what we're sitting with now is not just the normal mental health issues that people just have. If you're a human and you're alive, your mind's a mess. That's why I called my book Cleaning Up the Mental Mess. So there's no one's exempt. We've got to stop thinking that mental health affects them and not me. If you're human, you're experiencing adversity, up and down, good and bad, you're in a mental mess a lot of your day, and we need to manage it. So mental health, when it gets very extreme, then we go down to the psychotic breaks and the severe depressions. But those are still not illnesses. Those are just warning symptoms that something's going on, that we need to go and find out the story and help you to reconceptualize that story. And that's what's so vital, that we don't keep thinking that there is that the drugs haven't worked. The current labeling, diagnosing, and drugging hasn't worked. The prevalence has increased. Suicide has increased. Death of despair has increased. Lack of increase in. We have a mismanagement of mental health, which has created a whole lot of new iatrogenic problems, which are damage to the brain from these drugs, which are then producing other illnesses, but they're not the person's pain. They're actually damage to the brain, which is then called, and they can be healed. I'm just saying that up front. No one must just go off their drugs. So if anyone's listening to this and they're on any form of psychotropics, Shawn and I are not saying, and I'm not saying as a doctor that you go straight, do not, because your brain has adapted. So if you just stop, you will have severe withdrawal symptoms. And then your doctors will put you on higher doses and multiple drugs. You need to get with the doctor who understands how to withdraw. And there's many, many sites that you can go on, and I've got information on my website, and you need to taper slowly under medical supervision. That's so important, that I cannot stress that enough. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and also, of course, we want to make sure that the people that you're working with have the same goal as you, first and foremost. Like, let's get on the same page so we're going in the same direction. And something really powerful just came up, is that truly the problem is that the problem is not a problem in the way that it's written for us, right? We think that these diagnoses, like there's something wrong with you, instead of understanding, no, this is a part of the human experience. Exactly. So when I'm experiencing anxiety, it is literally, it is feedback. It's giving me data that there's something that I need to address, rather than let's suppress that calling from our body. And by the way, before we even get into that deeper, you've said this multiple times, but I want to help people to understand a little bit deeper, because we tend to think mind and brain are the same thing. So can you reference that distinction for us?
So important to understand the mind-brain difference. And it's very understandable that we don't understand it, because mind is considered the hard question of science, and it's not the hard question of science. It's the most obvious question. And why? Because of the example I gave you earlier on. You don't even go 3 seconds without thinking. Your mind is always working. It works 24/7, and it's always on the go. So when you're awake, you have your conscious and your non-conscious mind working, and when you're asleep, you have your non-conscious mind working, and then also you have a subconscious mind. But before I touch those divisions, let's talk about then what is the brain. Well, the brain is not the mind. It's physical. It's a physical substance. So if I was holding a real human brain, or I had someone's brain who was sitting here and I took their brain out their head, which I would not do, and I was holding a brain in my hand that was real and alive, we could stare at that brain all day long, Shawn. It would never do anything. So why do I say that? Because we're told in the media, from the doctors, a lot of the psychiatrists, that your brain produces your mind, that your brain's generating your thoughts, that your thoughts are coming from your brain. They're not at all. There's a whole different pathway. Your thoughts are not coming from your brain. Your thoughts are built into your brain, but by another force, and that's your mind. So your mind is separate from the brain, but inseparable. The mind has to have the physical brain to express itself, and the mind also needs the body. So the mind needs the brain and the body in order to express itself, in other words, to express you. So mind is a gravitational force. We can use quantum physics and classical physics to understand it. it. It's very complicated, but there's been Nobel Prize winning work done on the gravitational fields that we immersed in, and the gravitational fields inside of us, and the quantum fields and electromagnetic fields inside of us. So one of the easiest ways to understand the separation is to think back to school, when we were at school, when your kids at school, and they gave us a piece of white paper, and then they put iron filings on it. Do you remember, like, having a piece of white paper with a bunch of iron, and this blob of all these iron filings? Then you brought a magnet into the middle and you put it in, and suddenly the iron filings arrange themselves into these magnetic fields. Now, that is a great analogy for mind-brain. Think of the brain as the magnet, and think of the mind as the iron filings, but also the iron filings are still substance, but think of the patterns, that what is causing the iron filings to go into those patterns. That's an electromagnetic force. That's what the mind is like. So the mind is influencing the iron filings. It's influencing, and the iron filings could be you could see those as your thoughts that are inside the brain, and the magnet is the brain. So the physical has to get a reaction out of it, you need the mind. If you're dead, there's no mind, so there's no reaction in the brain. There's nothing happening in the body. But when you're alive, the patterns there, the electromagnetic forces are there. So you and I are generating electromagnetic fields as we speak. The words that I'm speaking are coming from thoughts that are physically built into my brain of all these years of research and everything I know about the field. And as we're conversing, what you know about the field is popping up from thoughts in your brain. But they didn't just get there. They weren't just there. You built them. So you as a human, you, Shawn, went through life, and you went to school, and you went through life, and you got married and had kids, and you've run businesses. All of those are day-to-day experiences that you've processed through your mind, this force, and then it's been built, and then that the life is experienced through the force, that gravitational field, and that then goes through your brain and is transformed into thoughts that look like trees. So right now, as you are listening to me at 400 billion actions per second, you and the listeners and viewers are taking my words, and if you're looking at these, if you're just listening, you're hearing, if you're listening and seeing, you've got sound waves and electromagnetic light waves, you're taking those, and what is you? You is mind. You are thinking, feeling, and choosing in response to what I'm saying. So mind, if you want a definition of mind, it's this gravitational field. That's the sciencey stuff, this quantum field. Psychologically, the mind is how you think, how you feel, and how you choose. So as you think, which you're always doing, you will always feel. You never think in isolation. As soon as you're thinking, you're feeling. And as soon as you're thinking and feeling, you're choosing. So it's think, feel, choose, think, feel, choose, think, feel, choose. We're doing that in cycles of like these sort of 5-step cycles on a non-conscious level at 400 billion actions per second. And that's what you guys are doing right now. And that then generates this energy through the brain. And the brain responds electromagnetically, chemically, neurochemically, and genetically, and on a quantum level. And genetically is kind of that switch that switches on and it creates. So you are when the gene is activated, so as you think, feel, choose, it whooshes through the brain, electromagnetic, chemical response, and then there's the last response is genetic, and that genetic response then builds proteins, and the proteins look like they cluster together and make branches, and my words are vibrations in those proteins. At this point, you've grown about 200 branches, but you first grew roots. So as you introduced me, you sowed the seed that formed the roots of something about mind, brain, and our discussion, and the kids, and your daughter, so those are the roots. And as I'm speaking, I mean, as you were talking, and you grew a tree trunk, which is, I'm going to learn about my mind, and then the branches are your behaviors and emotions related. So the roots, the origin story. And as we're talking, we're growing more roots. The tree trunk's getting thicker. We're adding more branches with the data and the emotions, more information, more thicker tree trunk, increasing perspective, improving perspective. You're getting and more. And that's a thought. That's what you're doing at 400 billion actions, and that's in your brain. And we have trillions upon trillions upon trillions of these. You never run out of space in the brain. These are dynamic. They're organic. They're always changing. So today we're having a discussion, and I have already learned new stuff about my own work. So this stuff came up, and I grew more information. You grew more information. You know about the brain, so do I. But this discussion is enriching so we're growing more branches. You learn to drive. You grow the the roots, and you grow a thought of driving. Every time you get in the car, you grow more branches. It's experience. So your brain is constantly getting stuff built into it. So your brain is a responder, not a generator. And that's really what we need to see. It's a responder. So if it's damaged and not looked after, and this is really a huge part of what you do as well, you teach people how to, eat and also you work on thinking and exercise healthy. I mean, I've got your book, which I'm interviewing you about soon. Really amazing stuff. I love your work. Really, I also love your work. You're teaching people to keep this organ healthy and this body healthy, because the mind has to use this to be able to work. So if it's not working very well, then we have this fogginess. We have like driving through snowstorm without windscreen wipers. So we're dealing with damaged goods. So you want your body and physical health. So you have to look after that. But that's a mind decision to look after that. So they can get your book, they can get my book, and it just sits on their shelf. Or you can actually study my book, study your stuff, and I teach you how to study it. There's a whole chapter on how can you get information in your head and apply it. That's a decision of your mind. Studying means I'm going to think, feel, and choose and learn this information and build trees in my brain of how to eat smarter, of how to clean up your mental mess. So everything's mind. So mind is that force that creates the iron filings, or it's the force that creates the memories in the brain, these protein trees in the brain. And Shawn, it does one more thing. It does a lot more things. But when you build a thought, not only do you build trees in your brain, but you also have 37 to 100 trillion cells in your brain and body. As you guys are listening to me now, you're building this tree in your brain, a thought could be, as I said, there's 200, 300, 400. By the end of this conversation, you'll have probably a couple of thousand branches and roots on this thought. So it's one thought made of multiple memories. Like a tree is made of branches, a thought is made of memories. So what's a memory? The branches on the thought. So each thought is a concept with multiple memories. So we build that in our brain, and that whole concept also goes into the DNA of every single cell. How that works, we're still trying to understand, but those tiny little DNA strands also store the thoughts. So whatever's in your brain is also in every cell of your body, which is phenomenal. And that is why we experience, like PTSD is the most obvious thing to recall, that a trauma happens and whatever, and you recall the trauma and it may be years later, but that trauma as it comes up, that trauma then you recall that whole sensation inside of your body. And that's because you are calling that it's the physical inside of your body. You can experience something and let's say that you've been bullied by someone and that day you're very fluey. And now it's years later, and you built a toxic thought. So I've got this little tree to show, it's the living dead. It's like Game of Thrones. It's the living dead. This is real, but it's toxic. And if you don't deal with it and you've suppressed it, this memory's in your brain and your body and your mind, 3 places. So it's in the gravitational field. So that's why you feel it and you experience this like a photon effect that Einstein spoke about. It's in your brain and it's in your body. So when you recall it, you're going to the data comes back, the emotions come back, the feelings come back, the total narrative comes back through your mind, and that's why it's so overwhelming. And that's why these have to be suppressed these have to be dealt with, not suppressed, because they cause brain damage, like envy, jealousy that we spoke about in the beginning. So I hope that I know it's hard to understand, but think of mind as physical. Just step out of the paradigm that you've had for years where mind and brain have been used interchangeably and see them as separate but inseparable. This thing can do nothing without your mind. Your mind is you, your unique thinking, feeling, choosing, which happens at 400 billion actions and faster on a non-conscious level. On a conscious level, it's at about 2,000 actions. We are aware of it every 10 seconds. So we can be aware of our mind, of how we're thinking and feeling and choosing every 10 seconds, which is how we learn to self-regulate.
We have this kind of idea that we need stimulation in order to feel productive. We need to be doing something. Again, it's our conditioning. It's how we've been raised in this capitalist society. I don't have any problem with capitalism, but in this society, a part of that is the conditioning that hard work is what leads to success, and being active is required in order to work hard. If you can't just sit around and call yourself a hard worker. And if you look at any machine or any device, every single thing that we rely upon for productivity, gadgets, devices, machines, they need some period of rest. You can't just run them all the time and expect them to perform optimally.
Yeah.
And the same applies with our beautiful, wonderful nervous systems that we live in. We need to rest these things. And so, meditation is not a panacea for anything, but it can lay a really strong foundation for just achieving and even subsidizing the lack of rest that people don't normally get when they're sleeping at night. So one of the first benefits that I see that within people who start practicing meditation is they're able to sleep like babies, even people who've been complete insomniacs for years and years and years. I see this all the time. I would even say, 8 out of 10 people, and I haven't read this in any study, this is my own personal experience from teaching thousands of people, 8 out of 10 of the people that I work with will report after a few days, I'm sleeping so much better, right? And so when we look at why are they sleeping so much better, one of the things that studies say is that, the average person is walking around with a concentrated amount of cortisol or some stress chemistry in their bloodstream, right? And so what is the job of stress chemistry? To get you to run away from jaguars, to get you to not jump out of an airplane, to get you to protect you. It's a protective measure, right? But you don't need this protective measure if you're lying in your Tempur-Pedic mattress at 1 o'clock in the morning and you have to wake up at 6 o'clock to go to work. You don't need it then.
Yeah, life's pretty sweet.
Life should be pretty sweet at that point. But if you have it in your body, you're not going to be able to sleep as deeply as the body is designed to sleep. You end up tossing and turning or with some other symptom of sleep deprivation. And so your one asset, which is the nighttime rest, the one asset the body had to go in and rehabilitate itself, now it's gotten hacked. It's been compromised, just like, when you get malware on your computer, what happens? Things slow down, things get a little bit jittery, and so you wake up in the morning wishing you had slept better, not feeling fully rested, and then that causes you to be more susceptible to the smaller little stress that should be overlooked in the next day. And then it just snowballs from there, and then if left unchecked, that stress will start to habituate, meaning the body has its own algorithm, just like Google or Facebook have algorithms, where if you go and, sometimes you go and you internet stalk some friend or some ex-girlfriend or something like that on Facebook, you type in the name 2 or 3 times. I'm speaking from experience.
I'm like, yeah.
And then even if you're trying to find someone else's name, you type in the first letter, but because you've typed in that other name so many times, it auto-completes it. And that's what the body does. If you keep going into the stress reaction enough times, one day the body's going to say, you know what? It's so much easier just to stay in this mode than it is to come out of it and go back in and come out and go back in. So let's just stay in it. Let's just treat all situations as though they're stressful situations. And so it creates this layer of anxiety and depression and pretty much all the imbalances that we report. If you look at the connections, and you can Google fight or flight symptoms, and you'll find websites with hundreds of these symptoms, and you're going to see everything on there, every single one that you suffer from or that someone suffers from dry mouth to joint pain to diabetes, Alzheimer's, digestive problems. And, so when we talk about things like, you're not a man if you meditate, well, if you can't get an erection, you're not, that's a symptom of stress in the body, right? Yeah. Does that mean you're a man if you can't get it because you have so much stress because you don't sleep at night? Yeah. Whereas a meditation practice supplies the body with rest, which allows you to sleep better, which means your reproduction system can work a lot better. Your body doesn't need reproduction if you're running away from a tiger, which is what it thinks is happening. If you can't digest your food properly, right, you're not going to the bathroom more than once a week. Is that what you really want? Is that what being a man is about, right? The body doesn't need digestion if it's running away from a bear, and that's what it thinks is happening. So if meditation supplies the body with rest and reminds the nervous system that there is no bear attack, all of a sudden, guess what? Your digestive system is now back online. Yeah. So all of these little long-term survival functions get shut down when the body thinks it's under attack, and they come back online when the body knows that there's no danger. And that's what meditation does. It brings you back to yourself. It's not some, cloud experience where you're floating around. It's just you being a better version of you.
Man, I think this is bringing to light. You see that what I did there? So this is really bringing to light how meditation actually shows up for better sleep. And you mentioned it, that there are certain layers or certain aspects of meditation that are actually more effective, for regenerating your body. And this is really being able to really even consciously turn off that sympathetic fight or flight nervous system and turn on the parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system. And it was American Academy of Sleep Medicine utilized, and this is again just one form of meditation for folks with clinical insomnia, so chronic sleep problems. And they had them to take on a meditation practice, a mindfulness meditation practice. And this was just even over the course of, 8 to 10 weeks. And them doing this daily practice in the morning showed up for them at night when they went to sleep. Here's what happened. They all had, on average, increased sleep time overall. They improved their sleep latency. So this means they fall asleep faster. Reduced wake after sleep onset. So after they fall asleep, they wake up less often. And they saw a reduction in depression symptoms, right? All of this from doing a meditation practice in the morning. But here's the thing. It's kind of free, right? Ambient costs, but this is what we're geared towards. And we're not looking at what is the actual underlying cause. And like your quote says, there can be so many problems that are solved with people just sitting alone, and not running from ourselves. Because I think that's another symptom, is just there's so much internal stuff going on, and it can be difficult to process, And, we all have our troubles, and most of the time we just want to go, for some of us, depending on your personality type, just go attack the troubles.
Right, the Band-Aid.
Then we got other folks who want to hide from the troubles, and they'll medicate themselves in various ways. And so this is actually another aspect of this self-care movement that's taking place, and taking care of ourselves. Not just we get it with the external stuff, getting out, doing the squats and the push-ups, and that's all wonderful. But also, and I would see this over the years, some patients, they didn't need to work out, they need to work in, and taking some time to help direct them. And now I have an even greater valuable resource to share with them with your book. So thank you for that, man. But I want to actually shift gears really quickly, because we was talking about this. Well, actually, first, let's talk about the time of day. Let's share a little nugget on that, because I want to improve my sleep. Should I meditate, while I'm in bed? So
right, and it's important to understand that depending on what style of meditation you're practicing, there are best times of day to do them.
Yes.
A lot of people kind of default to meditating either in the morning or right before bed, and what meditation can do for us very, very effectively is it can supply us with a surge of energy, right? So one of the reasons why people sleep better when they start meditating is because they're getting their supply of energy at the appropriate times. So first thing in the morning, if you've been just living your life for years and years, you haven't been meditating, there's a better than even chance that you're sleep deprived. Right? I don't know, you probably know the statistic more than me, but last I read, it was 8 out of 10 people or 9 out of 10 people have some level of sleep deprivation.
Oh, this is, when you actually look at the numbers, 2/3 of all Americans have problems sleeping either every night or every other night.
Right. So that means that, when you wake up in the morning, you're probably not as rested as you could be. So doing a meditation right then gives you that surge of energy, which allows you to function optimally for that first portion of your day, right? So now, obviously, you don't have to meditate. You drink coffee, you could do Red Bull. I call these sort of dirty energy. Meditation is like clean energy, meaning the meditation is not going to give you any side effects. The dirty energy substances and experiences come with a downside. You may get the jitters from the caffeine. You may get the crash from the sugar, right? So you can do it, but you have to pay a cost for that. Meditation, you wake up, you do your meditation in the morning, 15, 20 minutes is optimal. You don't need an hour. Yeah, 10 minutes is not enough. I would say 15 minutes average. You sit, you do your meditation. That should take you through the first portion of the day. And then normally what happens around 2, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we start getting that lull in our energy. That's where we start going for the second espresso or the scone or some other sweet. That's where you can do your second meditation. In that period of time, mid-afternoon to late afternoon, early evening, when you're feeling a little bit tired or a little bit distracted, you sit down, you do your second meditation, you get another jolt of energy. That'll take you through the next portion of your day, right? And what this meditation is doing is it's creating space in your awareness so that when you are dealing with your high demand, high pressure work situation, or you're having a conversation that can go off the rails, or you're dealing with your child and you don't want to say the wrong thing, that space comes in really handy as a tool that you can use to kind of energetically just kind of step back for a second, just hit the pause button on the reaction, right? Very, very practical, very valuable to have that. If you don't have that, what happens? You say the thing that you regret 5 minutes later. And then you have to spend the next 5 days, 5 years cleaning up from that one thing you said, that one reaction you had, culminated with all the other things that have been happening over the last 10, 20, 30 years. So,
well, let's talk about this for a second, because for me, and I did a survey, I asked my wife and I asked my son, my oldest son, who was there with me, he's 17 now, in the early days of Shawn. And I asked him, like, have you noticed that I'm a lot more patient? He's like, yeah, yeah. And, same thing. I'm just by the nature of the environment that I was in, just very impatient, very agitated type person, which people would know that about me now. But I would see those things, and I would see small instances of those things, like early on when I first met my wife. But the first year, let me throw this out there, first year we were together, I said these words with my mouth, man. I said these words to her. I was like, I don't think I could ever get mad at you. Yeah, congratulations, you played yourself.
You just
I don't
played
know
yourself.
what. I was just in that stage, you know what I'm saying? But, at this point, she's seen it as well. Like, it's not, and that's what I want to talk to you about. It's not what you get in the meditation necessarily. It's what you carry out of the meditation.
That's right. And
how you operate in the world. Because now I have that space. And also when there's something going on, it might bother me, you're human, but there's like a part of me that just doesn't, I'm okay. I'm calm. I'm solutions oriented. I'm present. There's a space that's there that gets developed, and it grows as you grow this practice. So let's talk a little bit about that.
And it's very tangible too. It's very tangible. I just want to complete the last thought really quickly, and I want to dive into that because it's very important. But if you meditate at those 2 times, then when you get ready to go to bed at night, you're going to have the best sleep of your life, because your body combined with the activity combined with the meditation is what then leads to deep sleep. If you wait until 11 o'clock at night to get the meditation energy, you don't need it then. So then you may end up having poor sleep, thinking, oh, meditation doesn't work, right? But it does work. You just have to do it at the proper times. So now when we talk about how do I determine whether or not the meditation is working, the worst way to tell if meditation is working is based on what you're thinking about in meditation during the practice, right? Because a lot of times you hear people, I just thought about my to-do list. I just thought about, this conversation I had earlier today. I just thought about what's for dinner, or, something else that's not very positive. Meditation isn't working, right? But if you keep the camera rolling, what's going to happen is you're going to come out of meditation and you're going to be in a situation, a real life situation, where it could get really intense really quickly, and you're going to find that there is going to be a little bit of space there. Now, you may not be aware of it in the moment, but once you accumulate enough experiences like that, somebody may come to you and say, oh my God, you're so patient, or you're so understanding, or so compassionate, right? And that's what true presence feels like. True presence is not you sitting there aware of the fact that you're present. That's not presence. If you have to know that you're present while you're present, you're not present, right? Yeah. When you're out in nature, when you're on a romantic trip and you're in the process of falling in love, when you're playing sports, when you're in that flow state, you're not aware that you're in the zone while you're in the zone. It's not until afterwards somebody comes up to you and goes, you know, you were amazing. The thing you just did, and how did you do it? What were you thinking about? I wasn't thinking about it. That's how you know you're in the zone, is after the fact. So everything that happens in those other 23 hours is how you're going to gauge progress with meditation. If you sit there and think about conversation after conversation, followed by song lyric, followed by movie scene, and then you're sleeping like a baby at night, it worked. Right? So again, we just need to, this is another myth, we need to gauge progress not by what happens in the practice, but by what happens outside of the practice. And there's a story I tell in the book, and I think I mentioned it in my TED Talk, about this woman, this lawyer, who learned how to meditate with me. And she lives in New York, very type A person. And she was just like clockwork with her meditation. And for a year, she meditated every day, morning, afternoon, morning, afternoon. And then she came back to me, and she sat in on a group of where I was teaching new people how to meditate. And I was talking about how, you know, progress in meditation happens outside of meditation. And she interrupted me and she says, I haven't noticed anything. And I've been doing it every day. And she, you know, she said what she had to say. And then I replied to her. I said, look, you probably won't notice it yourself because you are in your body and you know what you're thinking about, even though maybe you're not even voicing what you were thinking about, whereas before you were. But I said, just keep going. It's not possible for you to meditate as consistently as you've been meditating and not have some very positive, tangible benefits occur. So she left, and I could tell she was a bit disappointed. And then she sends me this email 3 months later. She says, Light, you're gonna love this story. I was out to dinner with my husband. I've been married to him for years, and we got into one of our normal fights at dinner, where I was right and he was wrong. Said, right. You know, the usual.
Typical.
Yeah. And she said that after a little while, when my husband was sure that the argument was dead and buried, he started to look at me like I was some kind of apparition or ghost. And finally I said, honey, why do you keep staring at me like that? And he said, you know, shaking his head, he said, 6 months ago, we had that argument, you would have stormed out of the restaurant and left me in here. Because that was their pattern, right? She would just leave every time they got into an argument. And he said, and now you're just able to stay? He said, I think that meditation is working. Don't stop.
There it is.
And then she said, you know what? I think you're right, Light. You know, this happened. And it's not something, she didn't come to meditation
right for that. Yeah.
Right? But that's how it works. It's so all-encompassing when it comes to these benefits that a lot of times people end up getting things from it that they didn't even really anticipate. There's another quick story I'll share about this guy who was in his 60s, came to meditate because he was having severe gastrointestinal problems. He went to go see an Ayurvedic practitioner who was going to prescribe him with different herbs and you know, natural remedies. And the Ayurvedic doctor, which is the Ayurveda, is the Indian healthcare, using natural approaches. He said, look, I can give you all these herbs, I can give you all this stuff, but it's not going to do anything if you're not managing your stress, because the stress is going to compromise your digestive system, right? So you have to take care of the stress first, then all these other things are going to work well. And so he came to learn how to meditate, and he shows up at the room, and the first thing I have everyone do is take their shoes off. He said, I can't take my shoes off. He told my assistant, I can't take my shoes off. You know, and this is just a tradition from India. You know, you come, there's a picture of my teacher's teacher. And so we made an exception. We said, okay, well, you can keep your shoes on, walk to your chair, and then take your shoes off, which he did. So I ended up working with him and didn't think anything of it. Every time he came, he'd walk to his chair, take his shoes off. And so the reason he didn't take his shoes off is because he had these corrective shoes. He said that about 10 years prior to me meeting him, his feet, he woke up one day and he had this kind of metatarsal pain, and he couldn't walk without his corrective shoes. And 3 years after he started meditating, he sends me an email and he says, Light, I was vacuuming my floor today and I looked down and I wasn't wearing my shoes. And, you know, this is not even something I was expecting. I've spent a fortune on corrective shoes for years and years, and I never thought in a million years that I would be walking without them. And I always suspected it was psychosomatic because no trauma happened when his feet got painful. He just woke up one day and it just kind of, I mean, that's how a lot of us experience life as we get older. We wake up and we get these little aches and pains that appear to come out of the blue. And like I said, when the body starts habituating towards responding stressfully and it stays locked into that mode, you end up getting these inexplicable health issues. The doctors have no explanation for them except, take this medication, put this Band-Aid on it, and that's how you're going to manage it. And so meditation has a really powerful way of unlocking that. But I can't tell what's going to happen when I see somebody. I just know that when you have less stress in the body, there's a domino effect, there's a ripple, and things tend to get better.
You have to be very careful with what you allow yourself to think. I always want you supervising the thoughts going through your head. Just because you have a thought has nothing to do with whether or not it's true. That thoughts lie, they lie a lot, and it's often our uninvestigated thoughts that drive anxiety, panic, and fear. And so managing our thoughts is critical. I have a new technique. It's actually not in this book. It's going to be in my next one, called You Happier, because it's what everybody wants. All my patients, they come to me because they want to be happier. But a bonus technique is give your mind a name, just so you can separate from your mind a little bit. Like I gave my mind the name Hermie. Hermie was my pet raccoon when I was 16. And she talked all the time. I have no idea what she said. And when I just don't have to listen to my mind, when I separate from it, I feel so much happier. I have this NHL player I treat, and he struggles, even though he's a Stanley Cup champion, struggles with anxiety. And as we were talking about give your mind a name, and he couldn't think of one. And I'm like, do you have a nemesis? He's like, yeah, several. And so he ended up giving his mind the name Johnny based on, this guy who was hyper competitive with, because he knew if Johnny got on the ice, Johnny wouldn't win. Right? I mean, that's, the competitiveness of high performing athletes. And it's like, you just don't have to believe everything you think. And please don't say everything you think. That's why God gave you frontal lobes to suppress. It's just evaluating, does this thought help me or does this thought hurt me?
So good, so good. And in this section, you give, of course, every section you're giving very tangible tools for taming these dragons. So with the anxiety dragon, you shared that prayer and meditation can calm the amygdala. So it's where we experience a lot of the side effects of this dragon. And you said that in a 2009 study in the International Journal of Psychiatry and Medicine found that prayer may be useful in the treatment of anxiety and depression. And then you actually performed studies yourself because you're somebody who's looking at the brain on how meditation can influence the health of our brains.
So we did a study. We actually did 3 of them on a Kundalini yoga form of meditation called Kirtan Kriya. It's a chanting meditation, or really it's a singing meditation, and it's all of 12 minutes. So I treat a lot of people who have ADD, and they have short attention spans. So I'm like, 12 minutes. Give me 12 minutes. You don't have to go to an ashram in India and sit on the floor for months at a time. 12 minutes a day. Sa, ta, na, ma. Sa, ta, na, ma. Sa, ta, na, ma. 2 minutes out loud, 2 minutes whispering, 4 minutes silently to yourself, 2 minutes whispering, 2 minutes out loud, you're done. Unbelievable. Calm the emotional brain, but activated the thoughtful brain. I mean, just like the perfect balancing technique. And it's so simple to do. I just love it. There's a term one of my friends coined called spiritual fitness. And prayer and meditation is part of that. I always think of people in four big circles, and people think of physical fitness. So I think there's a biological circle. There's a psychological circle. So that's mind fitness. There's a social circle, right? How we get along with our kids, our spouses, our coworkers. So there's social fitness and spiritual fitness. You want to be a whole, healthy person that's successful, not just in the amount of money you make, but you're more likely to make more money if you're happy. We want to be fit physically, mentally, socially, and spiritually.
Wonderful. So good. So good. In the book, which I always love that you do this, you give us an overview of our amazing brains. And you talk about the different processes they can control and how they can become dysfunctional. And I was actually reading I was reading that section to my 9-year-old. He was like hanging out on the couch, and I was having a conversation with him about it, the different parts of the brain while we went along. So it was like a really cool moment. So now he knows a little bit about the amygdala. He knows a little bit about, the cerebellum and of course the prefrontal cortex. And he understands like that's the boss, it's somebody who's there to make some decisions of what not to do, like that has forethought. So I explained that to him, that to be able to map it out, like if I do this thing, if I take this action, this is going to happen. Maybe I might not want to do that thing, and when that part of the brain is not active or undernourished, or we've got a fire-breathing dragon creating some kind of, fire somewhere else in the brain, it can mess that part of the process up. So yeah, I just love that you do that and you talk about the brain in the book as well.
I mean, your brain controls everything you do and everything you are. So knowing about it and then learning to love, respect, and nurture it it's absolutely essential to being successful at school or with your money or in your relationships or at work or just how you feel about yourself. It's one of the big missing pieces in the discussion on health and success. I got to scan Tony Robbins, which was really fun for me because, he's the world's self-help guru. And I mean, he's just so smart and so thoughtful. We did a Facebook Live and I'm like, you teach people really great software programming for success. But what if they have hardware problems? You have to get your brain right and then program it. You can't do that in reverse because you can give someone the best software tools, but if their brain's not healthy, they're just not likely to run the program as you intended. And for a long time, I'm like, I'm giving people this great information and they don't do it, which is why I'm like, I have to look at your brain. Because if your brain's not balanced, it's hard to follow through with the things are helpful for you.
Yeah. I would love to ask you about one more kind of inner dragon, personal dragon, which again, you have, is it 13 that you go through in the book? Right. So this one, because it just coming up for me right now, because I'm just thinking of so many people that I know and that I've seen in my clinical practice, that if we can't really dial in what they're doing with their nutrition or their movement practices or their sleep, so often it would be because they feel they're responsible for so many other things, so many other people. They put themselves last. Can you talk about the responsible dragons?
Oh, this is what causes codependency. In that, you worried about someone when you were young and you wish you could have done more to help, maybe a sick parent or sibling or friend, and you end up feeling responsible for other people. And you may actually end up doing too much for them and causing a dependency and then bitterness. So this is very important to tame so that you allow people to be responsible for their own lives and you don't take on more than is actually good in the relationship. So this is the dragon that causes people to do too much for others.
Anybody listening? Is anybody listening? Do you have a tendency towards doing too much for others? Just check in with yourself, because I know that some of us, for sure. It's definitely has been a tendency of mine before too.
I gave the quiz so people can learn about their dragons. Go to knowyourdragons.com. And I gave it to the police chief in Newport Beach, and that was his dragon, was the responsible dragon, along with the judgmental dragon, which is actually Tana's main dragon. If I ruled the world, it would be better. But self-care is so important. And if this dragon gets out of control, you create entitled people. That's not a good thing, because entitlement often goes with depression.
Wow. And you talk about that dragon as well in the book too. And, you know, again, I'm just sharing, you were so candid in the book too, which some parts was like, oh, I cannot believe that happened to you. But just to share really quickly, for me and this tendency, I lost my grandmother way too soon, overdose of medication. I lost my grandfather, you know, the love of her life. And this was shortly after he passed away. You know, she just really began to fade away pretty quickly. So of course, just having this internal drive to want to help basically save the world, and having that on my shoulders, it can almost kill you, you know, if you're trying to do something that's completely unreasonable. And I made a shift from being very self-centered because of growing up in a very volatile, kind of violent area. You have to worry about yourself or you're going to die. But from there, I swung the pendulum all the way to the other side to be very other focused. And I just lived and breathed and did everything that I could for my clients, for the patients that were coming in. And I got a little bit out of balance. But you just said the thing that really helped me so much was my own personal self-care and putting myself first so that I could be of better service without depleting myself, and also without creating that, like you said, that codependency, right? So people helping to inspire that power within them and being much more aware of my need and kind of tendency towards overdoing.
Yeah, it's biblical. Love your neighbor as yourself. So if you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to end up burned out, and that's not going to help anybody. If you do too much, you actually create dependency and bitterness in other people. Now, the upside for the responsible dragon is you are helping tens of thousands of people every week. And I mean, how exciting is that? You know, I love that for you, but it's when you become unbalanced that you burn out, and then you can't do the mission that you're on the planet to do. And so taming this dragon is really important.
Yes. And like I said, you've got very practical things. If any of these dragons are speaking to you, but there's many more, I promise you will see yourself in these pages. And there's practical things that we can do to help to manage these things and tame these dragons. In section 2 of the book, you talk about how other people's dragons can affect you, how other people's dragons are contagious. You even use the word contagious. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, part 2 is the they, them, and other dragons. It's, you know, you're always listening to people alive and dead that are still impacting you. They're your parent, the parent dragons. You know, even though my dad died last year, he's still in my head virtually every day. Or your mom. And I remember I was 6 years old and I told a lie. I have no idea what it was about. And my mom started to cry and she said, I never thought I'd have a son who was going to hell. So,
when I read that, I was like, oh, that's harsh, Mom. What?
And she was usually not that harsh, but boy, every once in a while. And so when I find I'm harsh with myself, I'm like, oh, you're listening to that parent dragon that, you know, I need to like re-educate. There's teacher dragons and coaches dragons, and Mean Girls and Popular Kids, and you know, our brain's always listening to that unless we tame them, and you tame them by basically rewriting your story. And you know, and I talk in the book about how storytelling is really how we've communicated history and values and goals. And you're always writing your story, and you get to choose. I actually talked yesterday, one of my patients is a screenwriter, and I'm like, you get to rewrite your own story. How exciting is that? But you need to know about the dragons that are influencing the current story and then tame them. And you don't want, you know, you have kids, I have grandkids. You know, I don't want them growing up with harsh dragons. I want them growing up with influences that encourage them, but you don't want to swing it the other way. The best parents always remember two words: firm. Like when I say something, I mean it, and I'm going to back it up. And kind. That I'm not a dragon, that I'm not breathing fire on your brain. I'm setting appropriate boundaries and doing it with love so you have secure attachments.
Something else that is a little bit later in the book, you talk about outfoxing the scheming dragons, right? These dragons that are external, that are scheming on you, scheming on your attention, scheming on your brain. And one of those being, if this is in that category, digital dragons, right? Digital dragons. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So your brain is always listening to what's going on around you. There's a new, younger, scheming dragon. There's a context scheming dragon. Like those are good for us? No, bad. There's the holiday dragon that we just came out of, where people, oh, it's the holidays, so I should let myself eat anything I want. But one of the worst dragons is the digital dragons, where they've literally, gadgets have hijacked the attention span of a generation of children and now adults. Silicon Valley purposefully makes your gadgets addictive. As Kellogg's sugar cereals went after stomach share, that the Silicon Valley's gone after mind share. And we should be very cautious about it. I remember my grandson, he's 9 months old and he knew how to work an iPhone at 9 months old. But I could tell that our relationship was really around the iPhone whenever I'd see him when he was little. And, you know, his parents did a good job of like going, okay, no technology, because they could just see how addictive it was. And many of my patients actually have developed Tourette's syndrome, a tic disorder based on their exposure to gadgets.
This is nuts. We literally have no idea of the long-term ramifications of this. It's like, it's such a new thing in our evolution as humans. It's pretty concerning, to say the least. Well, you do talk about, and really close the book out with this, and talking about your internal dragon tamer, right? There's a movie series, really great movie series for kids and adults. You know, they make the movies now for families, and like the little mature jokes are in there as well. But it's How to Tame Your Dragon. Shout out to that movie if anybody's seen it. It's really good. But your internal dragon tamer. So first of all, what does that mean? And second of all, can we talk about what hurts our internal dragon tamer?
So the dragon tamer is the front third of your brain. It's your prefrontal cortex. It's the brake, if you will. It stops you from saying things you shouldn't say or doing things you shouldn't do. And there's this dance always between the front part of your brain, the most human, thoughtful part of the brain, and the fear centers, or the amygdala. When the dragons breathe fire on your amygdala, it causes you to react with anxiety, with trauma, with grief, loss, hopelessness, or helplessness. And you need to strengthen the dragon tamer, that part of your brain, because it actually sends inhibitory signals. It sends signals to break or to calm down your emotional brain. And how do you strengthen it? Well, you don't hit soccer balls with your head. It's really important. You don't hurt it physically. This is why I did the big NFL study at a time when the NFL was sort of not telling the truth about traumatic brain injury in football. And my NFL players, I have 300 of them, 4 times the risk of depression as the general population. So it's really important not to hurt your frontal lobes. So protecting against traumatic brain injury, but also eating healthy food, sleeping. You get less than 7 hours at night, you have lower overall function in your frontal lobe, and the dragon tamer sort of goes on vacation. If you have ADD, often sleepy or dragon tamers, the frontal lobe function is less. You go too long between meals, low blood sugar goes with weakness in the prefrontal cortex. And so doing the right lifestyle strategies to strengthen the dragon tamer just helps you feel better overall. You want to protect the front part of your brain. Your brain is always listening to so many different influences day to day, from the scheming dragons, things like the news and societal input. It's listening to your bad habits every day. It's listening to something I call the they, them, and other dragons, other people, past and present. And it's listening to something I call the dragons from the past that are still breathing fire on your emotional brain. And in the book, I talk about 13 dragons. People can actually learn about their dragons at knowyourdragons.com. We have a very cool quiz. And my primary dragon is the abandoned, invisible, or insignificant dragon, because I grew up with a family of 7 children. I have 5 sisters, an older brother, which in a Lebanese family automatically means you're not special. That the oldest boy is the golden child, and in so many societies, but in particularly in Middle Eastern culture, which is what I grew up in. And I just always felt invisible and insignificant. And there are good things to this dragon. So in the book, I talk about the origin story of each of the dragons, what triggers them to breathe fire on your emotional brain and cause you pain, how they cause you to react, and how to tame them. And there's also a section on the upside. So the upside of the abandoned, invisible, and insignificant dragon is I've been seeking significance my whole life. And it sort of worked out for me. You know, we have 9 amen clinics around the country, and it just makes me happy, because what it does is it tames that dragon that I've been listening to my whole life. And so that's the idea behind your brain is always listening.
So good. And what I found as I was going through, of course, I found character traits that I see in myself, and then also that I see in my kids, that I see in other family members. It was just as if you were literally scripting out and detailing our personalities and our tendencies and our triggers. And this is why I love your writing too, is that it's so like right to the point and very practical and kind of pragmatic. And, you know, for me, I think that I didn't think about it in depth before, about birth order and how that can play out for so many people, you know, because even like we're watching Vikings or Game of Thrones or something, the firstborn son, he gets to be king. If you're thirdborn or secondborn son, you're the vice president, you're the vice king, you know, you're automatically like second tier. And so just even growing up with that kind of chip on your shoulder, and I thought about my little brother, and I'm just like, why are you like this? You know, and he's really been driven to find that significance. And the thing is, and like you just said, this is what I freaking love about your work, is that you can find an upside in it, because that's driven him to really make it through very tough circumstances and to make a name for himself and to be significant. He just started coaching football this year and took his kids, their little peewee football team, to the Super Bowl of their state.
Wow.
You know, and it's just so wonderful, you know, but it's that driving force that he's turned into something positive that used to hold him back.
Birth order is so important. And there's a lot of research behind it. And being a middle child, I'm a peacemaker, and I like that, right? So it's important to find the upside of the dragons so they don't hurt you. And the oldest, the golden children, often it causes them to struggle because they may not have to work as hard as, you know, those of us, you know, we think of Avis and try harder. But you know that success often doesn't come from being special. Success comes from your ability to work hard over a prolonged period of time. Now, you have to get over some of the self-esteem issues associated with not feeling special, and that leads into the inferior flawed dragon, which is driving the epidemic of teenage suicide. And you know, when you compare yourself to others in a negative way, it can often drive sadness and drive hopelessness.
This one right here, I'm not saying that anyone is more pertinent right now, but it really jumped out at me. And you said specifically, and I'm quoting you directly from the book, you said that due to social media, these dragons are causing an epidemic rise of anxiety, depression, and suicide in young people, the inferior and flawed dragons. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Whenever you compare yourself to someone else in a negative way, it makes you sad. It makes you anxious. And given that social media is just in your face over and over, we see especially young girls. And before social media, young girls hated how they looked. 93% of young girls were unhappy with how they look. And now it's constant in their face, which just drives the negative thoughts. I call them ants. It drives the ants to really shove their self-esteem in the dirt, and they get hopeless because of that. My wife was doing Christmas shopping, and you've met my wife, and we've had you on our podcast, and Tana's beautiful. She's beautiful, she's smart, but while she was Christmas shopping, one of her friends about her age popped up, and she's like, wow, she looks so good. And within 5 minutes, Tana's like thinking about, oh, I should get my eyes done. You know, what's the next thing? And it just was like trashing her self-esteem. Imagine having that happen over and over and over again. And I teach my patients something called the 18-40-60 rule, which says when you're 18, you worry about what everybody's thinking of you. And when you're 40, you don't give a damn what anybody thinks about you. And when you're 60, you realize nobody's been thinking about you at all. People spend their days worrying and thinking about themselves, not you. Right. So you might be comparing yourself to them, but they're probably not comparing themselves to you. It's such a trap. because there's always going to be someone, always taller, richer, smarter, stronger. And there are always going to be people who are not those things. When you want to just ask yourself, am I as good as I can be? And stop comparing. And in the book, there's actually some techniques on how to stop. But the first thing to do is notice when you do it and then distract yourself to look for what's right rather than what's wrong.
So I just thought about when you said that that principle, once you get to that point where you realize nobody's thinking about you, I thought about my friend Jim Quick, which I believe you guys know each other as well. He says that people are tuned into a radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me, right? We're all thinking about ourselves, thinking through our own lens, and we often get caught up in what everybody else is thinking. And so often, like that dichotomy, that contrast is like driving us. And my mother-in-law calls it borrowed desires, right? We're borrowing everybody else's perception about what we think we should be, what we think we should be doing, what we think we should look like. And it can create a lot of disruption for sure with our psyche. And so I want to ask you a little bit more about this one because, so number one, you just mentioned basically, and this is so powerful, is just becoming aware of it, becoming aware of when you're doing it, when you start comparing yourself. And also you mentioned about recognizing your triggers, right? So for your wife, a trigger was that on social media? Yep.
And it was seeing someone else about her age. And whenever you see somebody on social media, generally they have makeup on, they pick the pictures they want. They're not how they are in everyday life, but you're comparing yourself to you in everyday life, like when you first got up in the morning, and you're like, well, I don't look like that. And when you do that, it just drives your self-esteem lower. And I've been blessed to see some of the world's greatest athletes, and like I got to scan Muhammad Ali, and greatest movie stars and pop stars. And you just cannot believe the negative thoughts they have, like, I'm not enough. And you're like, you're not enough. No one will ever be enough. So am I enough for me? And one of the strategies I have them do is between now and the next time I see you, I want you to write down the top 20 accomplishments that you've done in your life. Because we focus on what we didn't do rather than focus on what we did do. And where you bring your attention always determines how you feel. So where you focus determines how you feel. So if you focus on what's wrong, you're going to feel wrong. And if you focus on what's right, you're going to feel so much better.
Right. Continuously, where we're putting our attention. I love that so much because this is something very practical, again, that we can do when we notice that we're doing this thing, and also just putting it in our tool belt to focus on our own strengths, our own accomplishments, that we often, because it's us, we belittle those things. They're not as important. But some of these things we've all accomplished are just freaking remarkable. It's amazing that I even stepped foot on a college campus, because I didn't know anybody in my sphere of influence, any of my peers who ever went to college. You know, it was just something I never saw. So even if I just put that in my accomplishments bucket, when I'm starting to feel inferior, for example, if that was one of my dragons, I can have that there to remind me, like, you know, you've actually done a lot of cool stuff as well.
I mean, it's just, how exciting is that? Like, I'm the first one in my family to graduate from college. I'm the first advanced degree person in my family. And when you start to get to a level and it's like, well, you know, I've not sold 10 million books, right? I mean, I can look at what I haven't done and feel bad or feel inferior, or I can look at what I have done and feel good. Now, it's always a balance, right? You want to stretch yourself to be your best. But ultimately, the death dragon wins, which, we might talk about. And if you don't tame that guy, you're going to always feel inferior.
All right. Now, this one, I'm sticking here because, again, this is something that all of us are really inundated with today, which is this comparison. I'm sticking with this, and I got to ask you about this. You say something that seems kind of counterintuitive as one of the tools for taming this dragon, which is to praise others. Why did you put that in there as a tool?
Well, because then you're getting outside of yourself and you're not so focused on you. Because when you're self-critical, you tend to let that leak to other people in your life. And it's a habit. Do I notice what I like more than what I don't like? And there's a whole section in the book on bad habit dragons. And one of the bad habit dragons is let's have a problem. It's where you're sort of always poking at other people. And often it's because the inferior flawed dragon is running your life. So you can't notice what you like about you. Well, you're not going to notice what you like about other people either.
Yeah, so good, so good. So I say this, that what you appreciate appreciates, right? So when you see something that might have you feeling peanut butter and jealous on social media, but to praise that thing and appreciate that in somebody else. And it just kind of encourages, it's kind of like letting your mind know, like, hey, I like that. I'll have more of that myself if I can make an order off the menu of the universe. But this kind of actually ties in for me. As we're talking, it just really hit me that feeling invisible can easily lean into feeling flawed and inferior. These things can be a little bit connected. But specifically, when you talked about taming the dragon of abandonment, invisibility, and being insignificant, and I think this can help here as well, and I just want to talk about this. I did not want to miss this. You talked about one of the strategies for taming that first dragon is to know your life's purpose. And I thought that was like, it seems like this very gargantuan thing to know that, but you made it very practical.
Yeah, no, I'm working with this 18-year-old girl I just adore, and no one's ever asked her to get very clear on her goals and her life's purpose. And, it's something that we should actually do in school. Like, why are you here? And what do you want? In a balanced way. Of an exercise called the one-page miracle on one piece of paper. Write down what you want. Relationships, work, or school for kids, money, physical, emotional, spiritual, health. And then every day you ask yourself, is my behavior getting me what I want? That is the definition in my mind of mental health, that you're able to act in ways consistent with what you want. But if you never define it, how do you know? And purpose you can actually find quickly by the exercise in the book. And it's basically, what do you love to do? What are you so good at you could teach other people? And what do people want or need from you in your circle? And how do they change as a result of what you do? I mean, for me, I change people's brains, I change their lives. And so as a result of what I do, my purpose is to create a revolution in brain health. And so every day I just go, okay, what am I doing to live out the purpose I have? And purposeful people not only live longer, they're cognitively sharper because they are engaging their brain. And if you don't know your life's purpose, I mean, there's a section to work on it. I mean, it's always a work in progress, right? Yeah. And, another thing for the inferior flawed, and I find myself doing this, that, I mean, I get to hang out with some really cool people. I just finished, I think it's my sixth session on Dr. Phil. And when I was younger, I might go, well, why am I not like him? And, have a television show and all of that. And that's the inferior, flawed dragon sort of breathing on me. But as I tame it, I'm like, well, how cool is that? I get to do this. And I'm grateful for the opportunities rather than I'm comparing myself to other people. And I found out this as a young psychiatrist. As soon as I thought you were cool and I wanted to get to know you, within 3 weeks you'd be in my office telling me about the garbage in your life. That if you think someone's normal and better than you probably don't know them well.
Yeah. And I got to say, I'm so grateful that you are not on TV doing a show consistently, because we get to have you more often. And also, you've written 43 books. It doesn't even make sense in my mind. And, you know, just having that capacity for, you know, like on the ground healing, so much that you've done, and, you know, the impact. And you've also had this incredible trickle down effect with the people that you've served and helped, and them sharing things with their communities and them sharing things with their family. Like, your reach it's got to be like 1 billion people by now. It's just, it's incredible.
Well, see, it just depends on where you look. And, you know, it's true for me. It's true for almost everybody I know. If you look to what's wrong, you're going to feel bad. And if you look for what's right, and it's training, you have to train your brain. When we talk about the hopeless and helpless dragon, there to train that dragon, and this is the dragon that drives depression, is something I call positivity bias training. You need to start pushing your brain to look for what's right during what's wrong. And in the middle of a global pandemic, it's like, well, how can you do that? Start every day with today is going to be a great day. Start every day. Start every day with that. It's actually on the top of my to-do list in case I forget. And when I go to bed at night, I always go, what went well today? And it's like a treasure hunt for me every day, just looking for those little micro moments on what went well today. And that way I can train the hopeless and helpless dragon out of that negative state.
You know, when I decided to become a psychiatrist, I hated the term mental illness because I thought it's so bad that nobody would want it. It's like you lose your mind, and it completely ignores the organ of behavior, which is the brain. And when I started looking at the brain, I'm like, oh, these aren't mental, they're brain. And when you get your brain right, your mind follows. And then I had this great case early on when I started imaging. He called himself the anger broker of the Sacramento Valley. And I saw him after he got out of a psychiatric hospital for a suicide attempt. His wife left him because he was abusive. And he was mean to me, he was mean to my staff, and I just started scanning people. And I told him on my third visit, I'm like, you need to go get scanned, and you have to pay for it, because I'm not going to treat you unless I understand what's going on, because I need to get you better quickly, because you're mean. And I don't like people being mean to my staff. It's like, these people are my family. And he went and he had damage to the left side of his brain. And I'm like, did you ever have a brain injury? And he said, no. And I learned quickly, are you sure? And so I asked him 10 times, and riding a bicycle down the Rocky Mountains, he crashed and broke his helmet on the left side. And I'm like, oh. And I put him on a combination of medicines targeted to his brain. And within 3 months, he's the nicest person. I mean, he brings flowers to my staff. He's bringing candy. Before I knew that was really a weapon of mass destruction. But get your brain right, and you're kinder. You're more loving. You're more thoughtful. So his wife had no idea. She just thought he was dealing with a jerk when he was brain damaged. And when I got his brain better, he was more loving, more thoughtful. And so I'm opposed to the whole, you have a mental illness. What the hell does that mean? It's like you have a brain illness, and if I get your brain better, you're better.
Yeah, yeah. That's so powerful. Just that simple distinction, because as you talked about in the book, there's a big stigma around it, you know, and people even saying this statement, and I've heard it as well. I'm not going to see a psychiatrist. I'm not crazy, but we're talking about brain health, not a mental illness. And we might wonder, well, let's talk about trauma, because a lot of times if we dig around, even me, I've got a big scar on the back of my head from, you know, a little tussle when I was a kid. And that could be a causative factor for a brain issue. Folk, you know, like falling off a bike or smaller things, you know, even childbirth potentially. Am I right?
Childbirth. I mean, the day you're born is one of the riskiest days of your life. 3% of children have problems with that. And if you were born with the cord wrapped around your neck or your APGAR scores aren't good, your brain is the most oxygen hungry organ in the body. It's 2% of your body's weight for most people, but it uses 20 to 30% of the calories you consume, of the blood flow, of the oxygen. And any deprivation state can give you learning problems, can give you ADHD, can give you emotional problems. And people aren't thinking about it because they don't look. They look at your behavior. So I'm also a child psychiatrist. And during my training, no one ever talked to us about the brain. That's insane.
It's insane, totally insane. And so I just want to plant that seed for people, for parents, for other family members, for yourself, that, and you know, adult ADHD is a big growing thing today as well. And your behavior doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you as a person, because we look at it as a character defect versus there might be something wrong with your brain. And if you could talk about, how do you get in there and take a peek with the SPECT imaging? What does that tell us?
So when I was in the Army, so I was in the Army twice, once as an enlisted soldier and then as an officer. I ended up being the chief psychiatrist at Fort Irwin. It's in the middle of the Mojave Desert. And there I learned biofeedback, which is I can use instruments to measure your body and then teach you how to change them. Like I can teach you how to warm your hands or relax your muscles or breathe with your diaphragm, all very helpful. But I learned about quantitative EEG, where I could look at the electrical activity in your brain. And then once I knew your signature, I could change it. So I got really excited about imaging around 1987, 1988. But in 1991, I went to a lecture on brain SPECT imaging. SPECT looks at blood flow and activity. It looks at how your brain works. And it gives you these beautiful 3D images of brain function. And so I just got obsessed with it. And I really literally started scanning everybody I knew, because I came to realize, how the heck do I know what's going on in your brain unless I look at it? And SPECT basically tells you three things: good activity, too little, or too much. And then my job becomes balancing your brain, because if it's working too hard, you want to calm it down. If it works too hard, you can be anxious, you can be irritable, you can be rigid and inflexible. And if things don't go your way, you get upset. Or if it's not working hard enough, you have brain fog, you're impulsive, you don't make good decisions, you can't focus. And so I'm always working to balance someone's brain. But I want the image. I mean, I'm treating this one woman and I just adore her. And her brain was a disaster when I met her, because she grew up around a toxic chemical plant. And yes, she had emotional trauma. And yes, there was psychological work to do. But imagine it like hardware and software. if the hardware doesn't work right in a computer, you can't program it. And so she had been going to therapy forever, but it wasn't taking because she didn't have the hardware, the brain function to take care of it. So using things like hyperbaric oxygen and supplements and really working on getting the organ healthy then gave her the opportunity that psychotherapy would have a lasting positive impact for her. So I'm never opposed to psychotherapy. I'm not opposed to psychiatric drugs. I'm just opposed to doing all of that in the dark and calling it a mental illness that shames people. So when I told my dad in 1979 I wanted to be a psychiatrist, he asked me why I didn't want to be a real doctor, why I wanted to be a nut doctor and hang out with nuts all day long. And my dad would never get Father of the Year award. But 40 years later, I sort of get why he said that, because we don't act like real doctors. I mean, I do know of any medical specialist that never looks at the organ they treat, and they end up putting you on powerful medications in the dark. So I'm in a new docu-series with Justin Bieber. So he has a new series on YouTube called Seasons. And I'm in episode 5 as his brain health doctor. So I've been a psychiatrist for 5 years. And when he first came to me, another doctor had diagnosed him with bipolar disorder and put him on lithium. And when I looked at him, I'm like, he doesn't have bipolar disorder. His brain's sleepy. He has terrible ADD, and he has a left temporal lobe problem. And it came out that he also had an infection like Lyme that was attacking his brain. And so if you don't really see the big picture, easy, especially for someone like Justin, to call him bad, to call him spoiled, and you do that with rock stars. But he's not bad. He was damaged. And through the program, he's just better than he's ever been.
You know, true story, I was watching Seasons last night for the first time, and I didn't know that there was this connection. And you can see also the change in his demeanor, in his communication, in his behavior. And we just attributed to, oh, he's just maturing, but he was actually getting his brain healthy. That's
Oh
amazing.
no, the darkness that poor boy went through. And often the issues we have, they're not ours. They're our parents or our grandparents. Mother was a single mother when she got pregnant with him. And she went to live at the Salvation Army because the grandparents were pretty unhappy with her. And she was a child when she had him, and she was in a conflicted relationship with the dad. So he's basically born in stress hormones. And then he played hockey. There were concussions. There's early drug use. I mean, from a brain health perspective, it's a disaster. And fame wears out the pleasure centers in the brain, which puts people at risk for substance abuse and high-risk behaviors. So, yes, it's taken a while to get him back, but it's possible. I mean, how exciting is that you're not stuck with the brain you have? And I have 5 of his scans, and you could just see them progressively get better.
And you've done that for so many people, and it's just so amazing. Something really cool in the book, and I was pleasantly surprised to see it in there. You took us through a brief history of the field of psychiatry and where we're at today with SPECT imaging, but you went back and talked a little bit about ancient civilizations' approach to this, up to Hippocrates and beyond. Can we just go through like a little brief, like where did this start in the beginning? It was like spirits and, drilling holes in people's heads.
So actually, chapter 1, I really like chapter 1 because I talk about this boy, Jared, who was just a mess, hyperactive, restless, impulsive, aggressive. The doctor put him on 5 medications. They all made him worse. And then we came and he had a pattern that didn't respond to those medicines. And on supplements and lifestyle changes, he got his life back. And now he's been on the honor roll for like 10 years. And so I imagined, well, how would we have treated him throughout history? So in ancient civilization 6,000 years ago, they very well may have drilled a hole in his skull to let out the evil spirits, something called trepanation. 400 BC, Hippocrates, who got it mostly right. He would have changed his diet, got him to exercise, put him with inspiring teachers, got him a job that fit his restless nature. And then they would have bled him to release the excessive fluids in his body. Okay, so I don't like the bleeding part.
And Hippocrates really was one of the first people, if not the first, to really highlight how important the brain is.
Yes, along with lifestyle changes. That, right? If you're depressed, take a walk. If you're still depressed, take another walk. And what we know, head to head against antidepressants, exercise is equally effective. Think about that. And then in the Middle Ages, odds are they would have put Jared in an asylum and beaten him, trying to, get rid of the evil spirits. They'd have prayed the devil out of him. In the 18th and 19th centuries, they would have placed him under suspicion in the eugenics program and his family under suspicion, going, there's something the matter with his genes. We need to get him out of the gene pool. So they may have sterilized him. This was actually started in the United States and was the precursor for Nazi atrocities. In the 20th century, Freud would have put him on the couch 4 or 5 times a week, talking about his internal conflicts, especially his relationship with his mother, who was very stressed when she first came to see us. I mean, if you don't really understand that insanity really is hereditary, that you get it from your children, right? When you have children, well, you're a parent, so when your children aren't right, it can make you more irritable, more anxious, more temperamental. And Freud would have talked about his relationship with his mother, but it wouldn't have worked because it's a brain health issue. And I talk in the book about ECT and prefrontal lobotomies, and Jared probably would have had all of those at different stages in time. And then now it's the 15-minute med check. It's the doctor will talk to you for an hour based on your symptoms. You have ADD, you have bipolar disorder, you have depression, you have a personality disorder, and then just start drugging you. And with no biological information. And it's like, who acts like that? Right? I mean, psychiatrists, we are medical doctors and we should be better.
Yeah. It's
This
scary.
has not gotten me a lot of friends.
But the right friends, though, the right friends and the impact. And it's amazing. I think you're getting close to 200,000 scans. Incredible. I mean, it's by far the biggest database, but it's really, again, shifting the conversation. You're in a position where you can shift the conversation and say mental illness and the stigma attached to that, psychiatric disorders, the stigma attached to that, it's brain health. That's what we need to move the conversation to. That's what we need to talk about. And one of the things that you highlight in the book are personality types. Like, what is your brain's personality type? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one of the first things I learned is everybody's brain's different. And my first book on types was on ADD. It's like ADD is not one thing, it's 7 things. Stop calling it one thing because stimulants help 2 of the 7 types and they make 5 of the 7 types worse. And then I wrote a book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Body, which was a big bestseller. And I'm like, obesity is not one thing. They're impulsive overeaters, compulsive overeaters, sad overeaters, anxious overeaters. Know their brain type and you can help them get their bodies right. And then I realized, well, all of us have our own type. And in the book, I talk about there's the balanced brain type, the spontaneous brain type, it's my ADD group, my persistent brain types, my OCD group, the cautious, was me when I was growing up, or the anxious group, or the sensitive type, the sad group. And there are really 16 different types. Knowing your type can lead you to the right strategies to optimize your life, and know if you're spontaneous, but your boss is persistent, there's certain things to balance out. Or what's common is the husband's spontaneous and the wife is persistent, and it causes no end of trouble at home.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And we don't even know it's happening though. That's the crazy part.
Nobody thinks about their brain.
Yeah.
Why? Because you can't see it. You can see the wrinkles in your skin or the fat around your belly, and you can do something when you're unhappy with it. But because nobody looks at their brain, it's just not part of the conversation. And it needs to be, because your brain runs everything. It controls how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along in your marriage, what kind of father you are, what kind of business person you are. And if you don't take care of it, you begin to make poor decisions, because your brain is the organ of every decision you make. And so, and you know this, if you don't sleep right, well, your brain doesn't work right. And then your decisions the next day, including how you talk to your spouse, are not as good as they could be, which then has a snowball effect of negativity.
Yeah. What if we could see a brain scan before we decide to get into a relationship? This was when I stopped and I just broke out laughing reading this part of the book, because you were divorced for a few years, I think maybe 6 years, and you determined within yourself, I'm not taking a relationship to the next level until I see the person's brain. And it made me think about, if somebody's a police officer, they're going to do a background check on the person, or, a woman might want to do a credit check. You were like, I gotta see your brain. And you met Tana, your wife, and you were like, and you really liked her. He's like, I gotta get her in here and check her brain out. And you did, and she had a beautiful brain. But it also spurred on some other events that you didn't realize at the time, which was, one was helping her father. And I think he was recently diagnosed at the time misdiagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, I believe. But
Right.
it wasn't that
Your
when she looked at
memory
his
is
brain.
really good. I'm so grateful.
Well, I've listened to you. And so what was it?
And I learned the best way to get a woman to fall in love with you is to do something special for someone they love. And so, yes, there's no way I was falling in love with Tana without seeing her brain. She was like way too beautiful, and my heart just went pitter patter when I was around her. And I know new love is a drug. It's just like cocaine. And so I needed to see her brain. And she's a neurosurgical ICU nurse. And so part of our bonding was over the brain. And when I looked at it, I'm like, she's got a great brain. I could be in a relationship with this woman. But then shortly thereafter, just a couple of months, her dad, she was estranged from, her half sisters called her up and said, Dad's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. We have no idea what to do. And Tana looked at me and I said, well, I know what to do. We should bring him down, which she was resistant at, because it's like, this is not a nice person in my head. But when I scanned him, he didn't have Alzheimer's disease. He had something called pseudo dementia, which is depression that's masquerading as Alzheimer's disease. Actually, it's why I fell in love with imaging. One of my first patients, Matilda, 69, diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, nearly burned down her house. Her kids want to put her in a home, and she didn't want to. So there's this big fight. And so they hospitalized her by random chance. I was her doctor. And when I scanned her, she didn't have Alzheimer's disease. In 1991, the pattern for Alzheimer's disease was already described in the imaging literature, and she didn't have it. Her emotional brain was working too hard. And on an antidepressant that I like, Wellbutrin, she got her memory back. And I'd never had that experience of taking someone in a dementia-like state and just watch her blossom into a normal human being. I mean, that made me pay attention to imaging. How do I know what's going on in your brain unless I look? And her dad had the same pattern. And 6 months later, he's doing all-day seminars at the local church. So someone diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease just blossomed. And then they made up, if you will, and he ended up dying 6 years later of cancer, but he died in her arms. And it was cool.
And I think one of the key things in science with mind is understanding that when I think, feel, and choose in this way, it has consequence. I will build a thought in my brain, and that thought will also build in my body and in these gravitational fields on a subatomic level, and they're going to influence what I say and what I do, and I'm going to get feedback. And if it's toxic, it's going to damage the brain and body, which can be healed. But the brain and body, we see from neuroscience, is not wired for toxicity. So we're not wired for things like anger, jealousy, envy, we all the toxic stuff you can think of. We're not wired for depression, frustration, irritation, anxiety. And that is why when we experience those, we mustn't try and push them away or feel bad about them. We need to actually use them to say, why am I doing that? We need to embrace them as messengers. Okay, I'm irritated. Why? I'm having an argument. Why? I'm depressed. Why? See them as helpful. Eastern philosophy's done this for years. They've seen that any negative emotion is something that's telling you a story. And I showed in my most recent research the same thing. When you see something toxic, not as something that you have to be frightened of, but as something that you should embrace to control, otherwise it controls you, you completely shift the power play. So if I say I'm depressed, I'm anxious, this is terrible, I don't know what to do, I'm so frustrated. As you do that, your brain and body and telomeres and everything, blood, homocysteine, inflammation, the whole lot's going crazy. But the minute I say, I feel depressed at the moment, I feel really bad, I'm having an awful day, but I can work out why, and I can manage it. You immediately shift the brain. Even feeling depression, with that attitude, you shift the brain and the body, and 1,400 neurophysiological responses will now work for you instead of against you. You know, I mean, this is profound. This is stuff we need to be teaching people. We need to understand this concept. Sorry, I get so passionate about this because it's so important.
No, do not apologize. This is the best. This is so good. You know, I just thought about something too. When we're not doing what you just mentioned, which is what our society has unfortunately kind of inundated us to do, when the experience of depression comes up and we don't address it, we become so distant from it. We don't even recognize it anymore. And we compensate, we continue to compensate. And now it's like, and this is what we're going to get into next, which is cleaning up this mental mess so we can get closer to seeing these feedbacks mechanisms from our body and our brain. Your mind creates your brain. And even right now, as we're doing this incredible podcast, everybody listening, we're growing new roots. We're creating roots. We're growing basically these branches of thought, of association. And it could be healthy, or as you gave the Game of Thrones reference, it could be a White Walker type of branches, or you can get some nice, handsome Jon Snow branches going, either way. But we have to clean up our mental mess. And I'm going to share this directly from your book because I want to start with this. You said that so much in our society seems to convey the message of now. It's as if we've entered an era where we have sacrificed the processing of knowledge for the gathering up of data. All right. So now I want to really be clear about this, because this was one of those moments when I was reading this and it really struck me, especially we got social media, we've got the internet, we have so much data at our fingertips, but I've rarely seen a person, especially in the context of an argument, sitting with the idea, really allowing that to play out and to process it and to think about it, think about different angles of it, think it where it might not be true. And allowing that to really become a basis of knowledge, because right now we're gathering so much data, but we're starving for knowledge. So let's start with that.
I love that. It's one of my favorite things to talk about as well. I love talking about all this stuff. It's so true. We're brilliant. Okay, but bottom line, humans are phenomenal. We have this endless capacity in our mind, in our non-conscious mind, which is working 24/7, which is infinite. It's like this massive forest. If you had to visualize flying over a forest with a helicopter, and it's just endless. that we have this infinite capacity to build, to respond to everything we're seeing and hearing, and build it in our brain. So we're going to do that, and we do select. Our brain is also very it's trained to be selective, but our brain can't select. Our brain is designed, its mechanisms are selective, but it has to be driven by something to be selective. So we mustn't personalize the brain, because the brain can't do anything without you. Okay, so with your thinking, feeling, and choosing, so which is your mind. So with all this ability to look and hear and see, like you've described, we are taking that and we are growing data banks in our brain, and they're going into this non-conscious mind. So this forest analogy has got a whole big sections of little trees that are light green, but they're just sitting there. They're just like fillers. You could even see them as almost moss on the ground if you wanted to have an analogy. But I can't really use the information in them because they're so far away and they're so inaccessible. They're this really inaccessible, almost like inside an oyster shell. So it's there, but I can't access it because I haven't put it into the ground properly. It's not something that's user friendly. Maybe it's even the rocks on the ground could be a good analogy. It's there, it's in the forest, but it's not accessible. And so we know we heard that, and we know we read that, and we know something about that, but we haven't. And that creates a lot of mess. Actually, rocks is a good analogy, because now we've got this mess and these little trees of some that we spent a bit of time, and that's not the natural design. The natural design of our forest should be this plush, rich, beautiful trees, like in San Fran, the redwoods. Think of those trees and that incredible root system. That's what we designed for. We designed for deep intellectual thought. We designed for that redwoods forest where their root system is extensive, and all systems are, but the redwoods are known for their hugeness and their plushness and the root systems that are phenomenal and massive. That is what the human brain looks like. Inside we have redwoods that we're supposed to have, and our mind also has this redwood nature where if that makes sense. But we're not always thinking deeply enough. So instead of building these beautiful lush trees, our conversation now is building a beautiful lush tree. But if we just kind of skim the surface, we would just build a little tiny kind of tree that might just disintegrate and have a whole bunch of rocks and stuff covering it. So that's what's happening, and that causes in the brain, that looks like these still protein branches, but the proteins don't form in a very sustainable way. So if you don't do something with that information, energy is never lost. And this is all energy inside the protein. Energy is never lost. It's vibrational energy. It's transferred. It's converted. So if you don't pay any more attention to something, you just gather the data, it's going to convert into heat energy and disappear. So in your forest, there's these little trees and these rocks and these puffs of smoke all over the place. That is the information you've gathered that just, it's gone out of your head. It's converted. And that's terrible if it's something you need. But if you take the time to think and feel and choose in a very systematically mind-driven, mind-managed way, you will actually grow a tree that gets roots and actually starts being, maybe it's a little bit light green and small, but then over time it becomes this lush redwood type tree. As soon as it's that kind of tree in the gravitational fields, it's also going to be that kind of tree in the brain, and that's the kind of tree that influences behavior. So if you want a behavior change in your life, if you want to be able to have an intelligent discussion about something or be a contributor, or, when you think of someone who's wise, it's someone who's well read and who's thought about it, and they can contribute wisdom to a conversation. They tend to be the ones that are, maybe not always the calmer ones, but the ones that can kind of see two sides of the coin, that agree to disagree, that can, and I don't want to use politics, but there's certainly, you can see this in, I'm not going to mention names, but you can see this in certain politicians very easily, the ones that are using wise minds and the ones that are just spouting out all kinds of stuff. And, that's just all around us now, so I use that example. But we do that in our own lives. We're all guilty of that too. So that's what is very damaging for the brain, because that dirt, those little trees that you don't build, that keep making puffs of smoke, that's in the gravitational fields of the mind. It creates a disruption in energy. So the non-conscious level, in the gravitational fields, in that third sort of level, they're those that makes little balls of energy rolling through the forest. I'm giving as many visuals, and those are like, especially where there's a lot of toxicity or unprocessed stuff, both areas will produce unbalanced energy, and that makes us feel uncomfortable. We feel something's wrong, and you can actually even feel a little bit depressed and anxious, and from not learning properly. And that's not even, I haven't even touched on the toxicity side. So what we want to do is deal with that through deep level mind brain building. I have a whole section in the book called Brain Building, where I teach you how to not let that happen, because it's actually dangerous. It affects, you talk about helping people sleep, and you've actually written a book about sleep. One of the biggest causes of people not sleeping is not thinking deeply enough to build redwoods, and having too many of these little things and dirt, and it creates toxicity in the brain. So when you're sleeping at night, your brain's housekeeping. So if you've got a lot of the stuff, it gets rid of it. It tries to get rid of it. And if you haven't used the neurogenesis you mentioned, every day you're born with, when you wake up, whole lots, thousands, maybe even millions, we're still doing the research, of new cells are born in your brain. They are designed for a very specific purpose. They're designed to be used with deep intellectual thinking, not just gathering of data, but gather the data, select the data, think it through deeply, build it into your brain. You can't, not everything, choose something. When you do that, you're going to grow that redwood type forest. You're going to use those new baby nerve cells, and you're going to create this brain resilience system in your brain. So learning new information and deep thinking creates brain health. It creates brain resilience, so that you're stronger for the acute traumas that hit us, like things like COVID, like the phone call that happens, like the thing in your business. Every day there's something that happens that we can't predict. And sometimes it's worse and sometimes it's not so good. If you don't have good brain resilience, that's a problem. So this gathering of data in our current now moment technological age creates these patterns of damage in the brain. So literally causing brain damage, and it will come out in your sleep is one of the first strong signs, and also in how you actually just managing through the day. There's a constant feeling of, I just am not getting this right, this living right. All my patients, Shawn, whenever a patient came into my clinical practice, and I practiced for 25 years, as I mentioned, the first thing I would do would be teach them brain building, which is the first, in the second half of the book, I talk about the neurocycle, which I know you're going to ask me about, but it's the second half of the book's practical. And the first section teaches you how to brain build. And as humans, we should be like, you clean your teeth every day, twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. You should brain build for at least 1 to 2 hours every day to keep your brain healthy. It's one of the best ways of improving mental health and creating the resilience we need just to be humans, to manage our mind. So there's a little passionate answer again.
Yeah, you've literally helped me so much. This is one of those things where you're bringing out something that's just like, it's lingering there in my psychology, but I never put words to it. A big part of our epidemic of mental health struggles is related to our inability to think deeply.
Exactly.
And
huge.
Wow, that
huge.
Is like an absolute, that just cracked me wide open, because as you mentioned, this capacity. So first of all, a lot of us are walking around with a lot of rocks just rattling around in our head.
Exactly.
And we're wondering why we can't sleep at night. It's just like it's a rattle just going around. We haven't really created a situation where it's a beautifully landscaped, cultivated. Our brains as humans, we've evolved to spend time thinking.
It's survival.
Thinking deeply.
It's a survival instinct.
Right. And now today we're just grabbing snacks everywhere. We're grabbing brain snacks and not really nourishing our brain through thought.
Exactly.
I'm done. This is
and that's contributing to this epidemic of people dying 8 to 25 years younger. And the research shows that you give someone a label. I mean, this is coming full circle back to our earlier discussion. You label someone, you literally can add on another 10, you can chop off another up to 20 years of a person's life. That's unbelievable. I saw in my research that those patients that came in the experimental and control group, the subjects that came in with so-called diagnosed clinical depression, they had such low energy in the front of their brain. They were identifying as a depressed person, and through mind management, through the neurocycle, we were able to help them shift that. But here's the interesting thing, Shawn: the shift happens on a non-conscious level in the forest, that non-conscious forest that I spoke about, the gravitational fields, that concept, the ion filings, that level. And also it's in the brain. So in the actual physical brain. So but you don't consciously. So let me say it this way: your conscious mind is always way behind your non-conscious mind and what's happening in your brain. Your brain picks up immediately what's happening in the non-conscious mind. The non-conscious mind is where the truth is, where what's really going on in your life. is happening. So we can be in a state of denial, which most of us do with certain things in our life. We've all got, and it's nothing to feel guilty about. This is the freedom in my message. Embrace it all, because everything's a message. So if you are feeling guilty, grab the guilt, find the reason, do the apologizing, and move on. Don't ever let shame stop you and block you. But whatever you've got in your life is going to affect how your identity is going to function. It's going to kind of block that. So what we saw happening was that if you from here, I give you the science and the evidence that in my clinical trials, and there's a summary there, that your non-conscious mind is already healing before you feel it. So if you go through the process of, for example, using the neurocycle, which is it's everyone should be using it. It's pure mind management. It doesn't mean you stop the therapy. You still do that. It enhances therapy. This is, what do you do with yourself 24/7? That's what I'm teaching people to do. What do? You got to live with yourself. How do you live with yourself? That's what I'm showing you here. So as you direct your mind and you manage your mind, your non-conscious and your brain will change before you'll feel it. And I've got beautiful little pictures in color in the book to show you that change that's happening. So I encourage people that in the first 3 weeks of making changes, you very often won't feel massive change or see massive change, but it is happening. The evidence is there. Your non-conscious mind is changing, your brain is changing. And that helps us to recognize, my mind's doing this work. My conscious mind, I'll catch up. Eventually I'm going to catch up with what's really going on inside of me.
Yeah, I love it. Let's do that. Let's talk about the neurocycle a little bit. Just give people an overview of what that looks
with
like.
Pleasure. Yeah. So the neurocycle is 38 years in the making. So the first version was developed 38 years ago to meet the needs of 38 years ago to meet the needs of my patients, to give them something that could help them deal with that trauma, that learning problem, whatever. And I was so disillusioned by the therapy techniques that I had been trained to use in my practice. Not all of them were bad. A lot of them had great principles, but there was something missing, and that something that was missing was the ability for me to control my mind. So what I wanted to do was to say, okay, there's all these beautiful techniques and therapies and wonderful stuff, but no one's showing me how to actually learn them and use them in my life. So there's a whole missing element. It's kind of like the rocks in the trees. If you just read the stuff but you don't actually learn how to use the stuff, you've got to. So what is that? What is that? How do I learn how to take the data that's coming in, choose something, and think about it deeply to build it into a thought in my brain? How do I do that? That's what the neurocycle is. That's what I developed 38 years ago. I developed the vehicle, the system for how you as a human can get hold of your mind. How do I get hold of my thinking, feeling, and choosing to catch these thoughts, these toxic ones, these patterns, these bad habits, these traumas, these things, these responses that are getting me stuck and making me, that I'm ruminating and my mind's going crazy and I hate responding like this, but I'm responding. How do you get that under control? And how do you build your brain? All that stuff. That's what the neurocycle is. So it's 5 simple steps, because if you're working with someone who's in trauma, you can't give them 5 hours of explanations. So I had to refine. I had to go through a process of understanding and refining. So I've taken 5. Okay, backtrack for a second. In the process, I studied the science of how thoughts form in the brain from the mind. So what is the mind? Developed a theory of mind, and then how do they grow into the brain? What's the process? How do they grow into the mind, and how do they grow into the DNA? How do they get there? And can I influence that? Can I control it? Yes. So the 5 steps are how you use your mind to grow these in your brain and in your mind and in your forest, in your DNA, sorry, and how to control it. So that's what the neurocycle is. 5 steps that are based on solid science. So each step, and in the book I do explain the 5 steps and I do give the science behind them, and if people want to read the science, they can skip it or they can read it, but there's an explanation of what each step is doing in the brain. So what I can do, if you want, Shawn, is I can give a broad overview of the concept with a simple explanation, just a couple of brain and body things, and then people can read.
Perfect, yes.
And then we can maybe do an example or whatever you want from there.
That sounds perfect.
Okay, perfect.
Let's do that.
Okay, so the first thing is that you have to prepare your brain, and that's something we're all familiar with, priming our brain or preparing our brain preparation. And that's not one of the steps, that's just preparation. So what are those things? Everything that we're familiar with: breathing, tapping, havening, meditation, you name it. Anything that you can start getting your neurophysiology calmed down. Because when we are busy, hurry sickness, or experiencing frustration, or dealing with a trauma, or in a life, okay, we get worked up. So what we want to do is, before we do the work of cleaning up the mental mess, it's very important to prepare the brain. Obviously involved in all of that is diet and exercise, etc. But those are big picture things. So in this moment right now, let's say that you have an argument with someone, and you've got to get your head together, and you've got to get into a TV interview, or you've got to get on a stage, or you've got to go into a business meeting, or you've got to have dinner with your in-laws. I don't know what it is, but you've just had a thing that's disrupted your life for a few moments. How are you going to get yourself back together again? We can take that as one example, and then we can take another example of, let's say that you were abused as a child and you've never dealt with it, and now you're an adult and your relationships are just messed up, and you realize that you're depressed and you're trying to find out why. And so, in other words, sexual trauma can be pervasive. So that's a big thing. So I'll approach the 5 steps from those 2 angles. One, how can I use it in the now? And I call that basically a neurocycle life hack. And another example would be people pleasing, or responding. Someone says something toxic to you, or you find yourself ruminating, or so it's interactions, and it's in your own head. You might find that you just can't get your thoughts under control, and you keep ruminating, and it's affecting how you're working and so on. The other thing is the more long-term stuff, like a toxic trauma or a toxic bad habit. Maybe you've got a really toxic habit that is keeping you stuck. So those are a little bit different. Both use the 5 steps, but they use them. One, you'll use them in 5 minutes or 5 seconds. The other one you do for 15 to 45 minutes every day for 21 days. And then you're not finished, because then you've built a tree, but it's small. You have to grow it and give it energy, you've got to water it. You have to spend another 42 days of doing the 5th step, which takes you about a minute a day for 42 days. So it's very little time, but it grows that tree into a redwood. It gives it enough energy that it will impact your behavior. So if you're in that relationship issue, or you're in that argument that you've had repeatedly with the same person, it's the same pattern, as having done this work of over 42 days, as the trigger occurs, this will pop up, because this has been destroyed, and you've reconceptualized it. You'll remember this, and you'll remember, oh, I used to, and you might even start reacting in that way, but this has got no energy anymore. This one dominates, and so you'll have behavior change. Or you're in that relationship, and that sexual trauma maybe has pervaded your ability you're totally anxious, and you can't form relationships, you just lost hope, you're whatever, but you work through this process, and it may take a few cycles of 63 days. What would that look like at the end? What that would look like at the end is, yes, I went through trauma. It affected me. This is why I'm feeling anxious. But now I know why, and now I know how to manage the anxiety, and I can explain that in my relationship, and I can now work on another neurocycle to work out how I can actually improve the relationship, because maybe your relationships are on the rocks because of that. So you've got to Can you see what I'm saying? So we give up too quickly. We do something, so people will do these 5 steps and think, I've done it once, why is my life not changed? Or people go to therapy, and
right.
You have to persist and push through. It takes 63 days to form a habit. It does not take 21. It takes 21 days to create the neuroplastic changes in the brain where you have found this, pulled it apart, embraced, processed, and reconceptualized it to deconstruct and reconstruct it into a healthy thought. Reconceptualize. You remember the past, but it's reconceptualized. It takes 21 days to do that, but it takes 42 days to give the sufficient energy to move out of the non-conscious into the conscious. It's like when you drive. At first, you're very conscious of the process, and then comes a day like now you don't think about driving, and we think we're driving automatically, but we're not at all. There's a huge dynamic intelligence occurring. You get in that car, you pull up your driving thought from your non-conscious mind. It's intelligent, and you add new branches because you're driving. It's a new experience. So that's what I'm talking about, okay? So prime the brain and prepare the brain, because otherwise we have neurochemical chaos. When the brain's got a lot of chemistry flying around and energy going crazy, it's very hard to get anything in here properly. So we just want a little bit of breathing can reset the brain. And one of the most powerful techniques, and I teach you quite a few, and I mean, it's easy to find preparation. I do give lots of examples. We have an app, by the way, that also goes with this called the Neurocycle app. And there's lots of, I walk you through this process, obviously like therapy. It's like literally therapy, videos, audio. So an example of brain preparation that you could do in 60 seconds that is phenomenally powerful is what I call the 10-second pause. And this is how you do it. So this is now the preparation, okay? So we're going to now do a neurocycle, but before we start, we're going to prepare our brain. And the 10-second pause is you breathe in for 3 counts and you breathe out for 7. The reason you breathe, the reason the exhalation is longer than the inhalation is because that pushes oxygen to the front of the brain, increases blood flow, increases what we call the alpha energy of the brain and the gamma energy in a balanced way, which means I'm now going to be insightful and integrative in my thinking, which is exactly what we want. We want deep introspection, insight, and we want to integrate. That keeps us in perspective. People that argue and say, this is my way or the highway, that kind of, who can't tolerate other people's opinions or don't know how to disagree, they have got very low energy, low gamma, low alpha at the front of their brain. They've got brain fog, okay? But when you let that fog drop back, you can actually then learn how to actually agree to disagree and still like the person and not cut them, that kind of thing. So that's one of the benefits. So this breathing, you want to increase your activity in the front of the brain. So that's why you breathe out for longer than in. If you do this, it takes 10 seconds, 3 in, 7 out. If you do this 6 to 9 times, which is 60 to 90 seconds, you would have stabilized the neurochemistry in the brain and pushed enough blood and oxygen to the front of the brain and got this balance of what we call the alpha wave, the gamma wave, also the correct burst of what we call high beta and delta, and that things are doing what they should be doing. You've prepared, you've laid the table, you're ready to eat. Okay, so another component that even makes it more effective is you add 3 words to the 10-second pause. And those 3 words are, as you breathe in for 3, in your head, you say, in your mind, you say, think, feel. So you're breathing in, it's 3 counts, and it's think, feel. So you're adding words, you're adding a cognitive component. So it's not just 1, 2, you can do it with your fingers. So like that, as you breathe in, but you're saying think, feel. You can even say it out loud, but you're adding a cognitive component to it. And then when you breathe out, you say choose. Anyone who does yoga knows about ocean breath, how you push the breath out. That's kind of what you're doing. You want to push that out. So it's a deep inhalation. It's not just a surface one. It's a deep belly breathing, blowing up like blowing up a balloon into your chest, into your head, and then whoosh it out. That kind of breathing 6 to 9 times is phenomenal at priming the brain. Sidebar, it's fantastic if you're in an argument or you've just got to calm yourself down quickly or you've got to get yourself back together it's great stabilizer. Okay, so these...
You just have to train yourself to be able to access
exactly
that moment.
And you don't even, that's why I say you can just, for a moment, you can just say, give me a moment, I'm just going to process this. And we should all be doing that anyway. We shouldn't be reacting and firing back. We should always wait 60 to 90 seconds before we respond in a highly heated situation, because we're going to say the wrong thing in that 60 to 90 seconds. We are going to say the wrong thing because there's too much chaos in our brain. We don't have enough balance. So our mind is worked up and our brain is getting this whooshy energy through the brain, so it's all messed up. So you're not going to react well. I talk about that in the book as well. That's describe what I've just, and there's a bunch of other neuroplasticity techniques that you can use.
So why is blood important? It brings nutrients, but equally important, it takes away toxins. So if you don't have healthy blood flow to your brain or any organ, really, it prematurely ages that organ because it can't get rid of the toxins. And so how do you know if you have low blood flow to your brain if you don't get a scan? If you have hypertension, high blood pressure. And 60% of Americans are either hypertensive or pre-hypertensive. If you have any form of heart disease, if you're sedentary, if you have erectile dysfunction, and it's like 40% of 40-year-old men have erectile dysfunction. 70% of 70-year-old men have erectile dysfunction, which means 40% of 40-year-old men have brain dysfunction and 70% of 70-year-old men have brain dysfunction, because if you have blood flow problems anywhere, it likely means they're everywhere. And in the book, I have these checklists. Well, how do you know if you have blood flow issues? And then, well, what do? You exercise. Walk like you're late, 45 minutes, 4 or 5 times a week. Lift weights twice a week. I mean, keep it simple. And then I talk about racket sports, because people who play racket sports live longer than everybody else. People who play football and soccer live less long than anybody else, but because of the head trauma. But racket sports, because they activate the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is this cool Cerebellum is Latin for little brain. It's about 10% of the brain's volume in the back bottom part of the brain, but it has 50% of the brain's neurons. And it's like the CPU, the central processing unit of the brain. And when it's not right, the rest of your brain doesn't work right. So coordination exercises, my favorite is table tennis, can really help. And then there are foods. Foods like beets increase blood flow. Cayenne pepper increases blood flow. Oregano, rosemary, cinnamon, all have been shown to increase blood flow. Supplements like ginkgo and vinpocetine can increase blood flow. So none of this is hard. Know which of the risk factors you have, and then just choose to do one thing for them because you love yourself. Right? I mean, getting well is never about I should do this, I shouldn't do that. It's a sign of how much you love yourself.
And I love that. I love that so much. Simple things, we can all add in one or two of those things. And I think you'd agree, the biggest thing here is the movement. Like our brain, our genes expect us to walk, and I get into this conversation. We can do some amazing things with the human body. We could do all these different flips and we could, squat hundreds of pounds. But what are we really designed to do? We're designed to walk. And walking elicits so many benefits. And one of those is like helping to normalize blood pressure, blood sugar, because that's another one of these that we talk about here. So with Bright Minds, we've got blood flow, retirement aging, which I want to talk about in a second, but inflammation is the next one, the I. So we'll come back to the R, but let's talk a little bit about inflammation. Because again, that's one of those things, it seems to be invisible, but we do have some markers we can look at. And inflammation can just terrorize our brains.
It's a major cause of dementia and depression. Autism has also been associated with ADHD and PTSD. Inflammation is a disaster. It comes from the Latin word to set a fire. When you have chronic inflammation, it's like you have a low-level fire in your body destroying your organs. We can measure it with some blood tests like C-reactive protein or the omega-3 index. And I actually did a study of 50 consecutive patients who came to our clinic who were not taking fish oil. 49 of them had suboptimal levels of omega-3 fatty acids. A study from the CDC came out and said 97% of Americans were low in omega-3 fatty acids, which you get from fish. Now, you can get plant sources, but the plant sources like nuts and seeds and avocados, they don't have EPA and DHA, which are the two omega-3s that really work in your brain. And so I'm a huge fan of sustainable fish, but also high quality fish oil because it can help put out the fire of inflammation. If your gut's not right, you'll likely have inflammation because you end up with this thing called leaky gut, where things get inside your body that your gut should have protected you from, and that can cause inflammation. You also know if you have inflammation, if you have rosacea, so if you have this redness around your face, or if you have joint pain. And curcumins which come from the spice turmeric, help decrease inflammation. So omega-3 fatty acids help, curcumins help. Another major cause of inflammation is gum disease. When you have periodontal disease, it makes it more likely you have systemic inflammation, heart disease, and brain disease. So before I read the research, I didn't really care that much about my teeth. Now I'm a flossing fool because if my gums aren't right, my heart's not right, my brain's not right. So taking care of inflammation. So how do you know if you have it? C-reactive protein, omega-3 index. Do you have joint pain or rosacea? What can I do? I can take omega-3 fatty acids. I can floss. I can take probiotics to help my gut heal and be healthy.
Yeah.
Simple, not hard.
Yeah. I definitely want to talk about retirement aging. This is a big one. And I didn't think about this one until I read it in the book. So let's talk about that one. So why is this included in the Bright Mind strategy? We all need to pay attention to this.
Well, I hate this. You know, I published a study last year on 62,000 scans. It's the largest imaging study ever on how the brain ages. And it's just bad news. I mean, as we age, our brain gets less and less active, but it doesn't have to. And what we discovered is when you stop learning, your brain starts dying. And so now think about kids who have ADHD or learning problems. They don't like school. And the reason they don't like school is because they're not good at it. And so they're like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. So lifelong learning doesn't become part of who they are, which then increases their risk of dementia. As we age, we need to be more serious about our health, not less serious. And one of the things I discovered is the scans can actually tell 20 years before you have Alzheimer's disease if you're headed for the dark place. So Lisa Gibbons is a friend of mine. She's a radio television personality. I was on her show a long time.
Was it Entertainment Tonight she was on there
She was
too?
on Entertainment Tonight, and then she had her own show. And her mother and grandmother died with Alzheimer's disease. And I start going, you need to come see me. And I love her. I would just love her as a friend. And she's like, no, no. And then about 12 years ago, she went through a divorce and got depressed, and she came to see me. And her brain was terrible. And I'm like, your brain is headed to where your grandmother and mother's brains went. I said, but doesn't have to. And she did everything I asked her to. And last year we did a program together and we rescanned her, and it's so much better. So would you want a better brain 10 years from now? Who wouldn't, right? I mean, I want mine to be better tomorrow, but I'm 65 now. Do I want a better brain at 75? You bet, because I know what most 75-year-old brains look like, and it's not good news. But you just have to be serious. And the older you get, the more serious you need to be.
We briefly touched on this earlier. Trauma, head trauma, can be a big causative agent here. But also, it's not just physical trauma, but emotional trauma. You talk about mind storms. So we have the acronym BRIGHT, and then we have MINDS. The M is for mind storms. Let's talk about that one.
So it's abnormal electrical activity in the brain, especially in an area called the temporal lobes. And most people don't know about it. But what I discovered early on, if your temporal lobes aren't right, you have mood instability, irritability, temper problems, dark thoughts come out of the blue for no reason. And actually, anti-seizure medications or the ketogenic diet, which is not good for everyone. It's terrible for people who have OCD. They become more OCD on it. But for people who have these mind storms, it really helps settle them to be healthier, more normal, happier. And, I discovered them from looking, but there was actually a book written in 1980 by Jack Dreyfus, the founder of the famous Dreyfus Mutual Fund, that when he went on an anticonvulsant, his depression went away, his anxiety went away. He said he'd had suicidal thoughts for decades, and 3 days on this medicine, he didn't need his shrink anymore. And I've had some miraculous cases when I'm like, oh, this is a temporal lobe issue. And Justin, who we talked about, it's one of his risk factors that he had it, whether, it was from the infection he had or the 3 concussions he had, that, when we stabilized that part of his brain, he just did so much better. And it's just something people don't know about. Is that a psychiatric illness? Absolutely not. It's a brain illness. And so understanding the difference is important.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that we equate, and I know that just on a normal day-to-day basis, we don't think about all the electrical activity happening upstairs. And that's what's creating all of this. Like, even the thoughts that we're having, my ability to speak to you right now, it's just this electric mind storm taking place. But we can also have like severe storms if we're in a state of stress, if we're in a state of you know, even a lower activity because we're not being stimulated. And so, what I want to ask you about is we've touched on this, but I really want to get more of a definitive answer. When we're subjected to being in a stressful environment or growing up in a traumatic environment, how can that actually damage our brain?
But changes your brain. Children who grow up in violent homes have the same brain patterns as soldiers in war. Think about that. And when you grow up in an unpredictable environment. So when I was a child psychiatrist, I studied children and grandchildren of alcoholics. My first wife grew up in a very violent alcoholic home. And I'm like, why doesn't she like me? She's the reason I became a psychiatrist. When I got married when I was a second-year medical student, and then a couple of months later, I mean, just a couple of months later, she tried to kill herself. And I brought her to see a wonderful psychiatrist, and I came to realize if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her, it helped me, it helped our kids. And and then I found out, and I dated her. I talked to this girl every day for 3 years when we were teenagers, and I had no idea her dad was beating her mom, that the police were being called because the secrecy in alcoholic homes is so high. And then I learned that when you grow up in that chronically stressful environment, you learn not to talk, not to trust, and not to feel. And it can have a big negative impact on your relationships. But when I started scanning people who had post-traumatic stress disorder from these dysfunctional childhoods, their emotional brain was just lit up. And so, as opposed to traumatic brain injury, where we see decreases on the scan, in PTSD, we see increases in their emotional centers. So their amygdala becomes larger and more sensitized, their hippocampus, their cingulate gyrus. So it's a pattern I call the diamond pattern, and I show some scans in the brain of this. And so they end up always watching for the shoe to drop. And my wife, Tana, says when she first met me that she didn't trust me because she didn't trust I was nice. I mean, it really took her 18 months. She'd come, she'd go, she'd come, she'd go. She goes, like, nobody's that nice because it didn't fit her experience growing up with people that were unpredictable. So it changes your brain, but it also changes your mindset.
Man, so powerful. So powerful. So just jumping forward a little bit here in the acronym MIND, so Bright Minds. So we talked a little bit about mind storms. I want to talk about the D, diabetes. This one is huge.
Yes, huge in many
Literally.
ways. So why is it important? You know, why would a psychiatrist want to talk about blood sugar and weight? So diabetes is you're either diabetic or pre-diabetic, means your fasting blood sugar is high, or you're overweight or obese. According to a new study from the Journal of the American Medical Association, 50% of the American population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Think about that. That means and why do you not want a high blood sugar? Because as blood sugar levels go up, it actually begins to erode your blood vessels, making them more brittle and likely to break, which impairs healing. And anybody who's loved someone who died with diabetes, you just know the disaster that it causes. My father-in-law got it when he was 55, and he told me he was going to kill himself if he had to take insulin. Well, he ended up at 60 having to take insulin. He didn't kill himself, but the diabetes killed him. He ended up losing his legs, losing his eyesight, losing his heart, and then losing his mind. You need healthy blood sugar and healthy blood flow. And it's just rampant because of our diets. But what people also don't know, we didn't talk much about the T, the toxins. Our toxic load is damaging not only our brain, but also our pancreas that produces insulin to help us. And so putting toxic products on your body, eating foods with pesticides, breathing toxic air, drinking toxic water. And we know that the water in this country is toxic in many, many areas, not just Flint, although Flint was a bad, bad example of it. So if we have diabetes escalating at epidemic rates, well, what's happened to obesity? Since 1982, obesity in children was 4%. Now it's 32%. It's gone up 800%. And, when we were growing up, we just don't remember it. But now, 72% of American adults are overweight. 40% of us are obese. And I published 2 studies that showed as your weight goes up, the actual physical size and function of your brain goes down. And just over the weekend, looking at 20,000 patients, I mapped each area of the brain by, are you underweight, normal weight, overweight, obese, morbidly obese? And there's a linear correlation between weight and blood flow to every region of the brain. Every region of the brain, as your weight went up, the blood flow and activity of your brain went down. And that should just scare us to begin to do the right thing. And the right thing is not Nutrisystems or Jenny Craig and all of that, because a lot of that is fake food. It's to really focus on loving food that loves you back. And people go, but I love donuts. But there's not one healthy thing about donuts. They hurt you. Loving donuts is being in an abusive relationship. And I don't know if we ever talked about the Daniel Plan, this program I did with Mark Hyman and Pastor Rick Warren, where we got Saddleback Church healthy, one of the largest churches in the world. The first week, 15,000 people signed up. The first year, they lost £250,000. But we then wrote a best-selling book, and thousands of churches did that. But right after we started the Daniel Plan, one of the pastor's wives came to my office, and she said, I heard you talk. And I told my husband that night, I'd rather get Alzheimer's disease than give up sugar.
Well,
I'm like,
well.
Did you date the bad boys in high school? Because that's like a bad relationship, to be in love with something that damages you. I mean, it's abuse, but we don't think about it. And in The End of Mental Illness, I love this writing device I put in the book, where I wrote, if I was an evil ruler and I wanted to increase the incidence of mental illness in America, what would I do? And there's 62 evil ruler strategies. But one of them is I'd serve donuts at church. Go to church to get your soul fed. These people are trying to kill you.
Oh my goodness. And I literally remember growing up and then having donuts at church. And when you talked about, I'm a very visual person. Did you like the Bad Boys? I pictured a circle donut pulling up on a motorcycle with 2 long john legs and a donut hole head, and she hopping on the bike, and it's got the ripped off sleeves. Anyways,
I love that. That's a great image.
And again, we don't think about this. We don't think about the relationship. And people would come into my office all the time when I was, doing my clinical work, and the big thing people would say without even really talking to me is what they don't want to give up. Right? I don't have to give them my bread, do I? Just like all of these different stigmas, and how we don't realize how addicted we are as well. These things can be running our lives. But then for many of these things, there are healthier alternatives, or things like you just said, love food that loves you back. There's so much to love that we don't really know about, because I grew up in same thing. We grew up in a paradigm where when we look at the store, it seems like there's all this different stuff, but it's really like the same 12 different food items packaged and processed differently. It's like wheat, corn, soy, maybe like throw chicken and some oranges in there. But it's like the same stuff is most of the stuff that we grew up with. We don't know about. There are literally thousands, tens of thousands of different foods. And conversations like this open us up to try new things. And I think it's super important because the diversity And our nutrition helps with the microbiome, helps with, and you also, of course, have been talking about this over the years, but you mentioned the leaky gut. But now we're getting into the situation where I'm hearing this term more and more of leaky brain, right?
Because it's the same thing. So when you say, think of leaky gut, the lining of your intestinal tract, so about 30 feet, is just one single cell layer thick that is protecting you from whatever you eat, actually getting into your body and causing all sorts of havoc. But there's that single cell layer that protects your brain from anything that gets into your bloodstream from getting into your brain, and it's there to protect you. But if you have leaky gut, odds are you also have leaky brain, which means your brain's more likely to store toxins, it's more likely to be infected, it's more likely to have big problems.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to optimize your mindset.
Most people suffer from an attention deficit disorder and an intention deficit disorder. So their mind is all over the place. Their mind has been hijacked by worry, fear, anxiety,